Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 7181. Enlightening Duel. Chapter 7181. Enlightening Duel. Chief Counselor V.S. Larkinson of the Upper Council has won the first of 4 duels of his ongoing leadership challenge. After a long and punishing fight, he has vanquished over the unshakable king of the UR Titan Phalanx by relying on excellent utilization of his superior equipment. The unshakable king has proved he possessed an edge in terms of fighting skills, combat experience, and endurance, but his inability to inflict enough damage to his well-armored opponent has led to his demise. The pressure of the duel proved the better of him. The more setbacks he suffered, the more he lost his composure, which proved to be a detriment when fighting against a high IQ opponent such as the renowned Devil Tongue. Trying to use your own companion spirit to kill the companion spirit who invented them in the first place is pure folly. In the end, the former strategos of the UR Titan Phalanx did not necessarily lose because he was the inferior fighter, but because he was arrogant and failed to respect his opponent's depth of solutions. The chief counselor has already gone off to a good start. The fact that a mech designer has won a fair duel against a professional soldier and a recognized champion such as the unshakable king while keeping most of his raiment intact is a clear indication of his strength. His approach to combat may be very different, but it only proves that the Ascended Giants still have a long way to go before they can become omnipotent on the battlefield. This singular duel has exposed that the combat doctrines of the Ascended Giants, more specifically the UR Titan Phalanx, are still far from reaching maturity. Equipment matters. The shocking outcome continued to spread among a restricted circle of people. Not all of them had the authorization to watch the live view of the secret duels, so they could only obtain hearsay from other people. This was why many of them grew shocked and surprised when they learned that a mech designer who may have been involved in many battles but always let his mech pilots fight on his behalf had won a personal victory. The duel was clean, and the mech designer won without suffering crippling injuries. He not only defeated his opponent but completely demolished the unshakable king until his head flew from the rest of his body. Many soldiers and warriors knew how difficult it was to win a fight in such a convincing fashion. Whatever the case, V.S. Larkinson had unambiguously proved with this victory that he was already one of the strongest human phase lords in the Red Ocean. Unless other major powers secretly cultivated their own army of human phase lords, V.S. could take pride in his ability to kill what many Ascended Giants considered to be their second strongest fighter. This feat alone was enough to win over many Ascended Giants, especially the ones who harbored reluctance towards the current direction of the Phase Lord Department. As brainwashed as they may be, not all of them had lost all of their old wits and common sense. They still retained the awareness of their human identity and also understood how idiotic it would be for them to defect to the native aliens. Even if they no longer identified themselves as human, they still recognized their ancestry to their old race. To them, their desire to go independent was more benign. They simply considered themselves to be children who had grown old and self-sufficient enough to leave the home of their parents. They wanted to set off into the wilderness and build their own town and society that existed as a distinct pocket adjacent to red humanity. V.S. sought to win over this group of optimists first. It was not enough for him to kill ardent traitors such as the unshakable king. He knew he needed to obtain solid backing from a large enough group of Ascended Giants to truly assume control over the entire Phase Lord Department, so he and the Dark Apostle had taken great care to abide by their honor and fight without relying on excessive technology. Of course, they couldn't help but take advantage of innovative and exotic solutions. It would be stupid of them if they threw away all of their advantages for the sake of vanity. Their first victory vindicated their approach. Good work, Chief Counselor. Eliza M.O. Ragadon greeted the Dark Apostle as returned to the temporary base in order to rest and recuperate. Our doctors are already waiting to receive you in the next hall. They have prepared stores of phase water and special rations that should be able to promote cellular regrowth and fatigue recovery of a man of your exceptional physique. The Dark Apostle did not deign to talk to the mortal. Blinky flew out instead and faced his chief of staff. How are the initial reactions from the people in the know? Eliza smiled back in a particularly satisfied manner. You exceeded their expectations. Most of them expected you to lose your first match. They thought you chose to challenge the unshakable king first so that you can face him at your best and minimize the chance of accidents. They did not truly think that a mech designer of all people could defeat one of the stronger champions among the Ascended Giants, though you managed to do so by taking the unshakable king by surprise with your special exploding spear. The manner in which you turned the battle around has drawn critique. This was not an honorable move. Victory washes away all doubts. V.S. huffed through Blinky's manifestation. I stayed within the rules, and that is enough. If the Ascended Giants did not want my other self to toss out a weapon that just happens to be primed to explode, then they should have added in this clause. It is their negligence that they failed to account for all technological possibilities. Besides, this move came at a hefty cost. The Dark Apostle had to finish the rest of the fight without his main weapon. I am told that the reactor that sustained the plasma spear was already beginning to run out of energy. It was a considerable burden to carry it around during the duel. Unlike Mech's phase lords cannot implant a power reactor inside their body. Not unless they still want to fold and unfold their bodies afterwards. Phase water organs functioned as the equivalent of powerful implants to phase lords. The two were matched together because the former still retained much of their health and functionality no matter how much the latter folded up their true bodies. The same could not be said for any tech or conventional implants. Unless they were completely biological and had sufficiently blended with their phase lord constitution, the tech would not be able to properly scale up and down. Power reactors the size of mech cockpits would simply get crushed or burst apart a phase lord's body if he attempted to shrink down to the size of a human. This was the reason why VS never thought about putting the reactor inside his body. Every phase lord had little choice but to mount their tech inside their raiments or turn them into external modules. You implanted the lesser Arsis organ inside your true body. Eliza pointed out an important variable. You could still supply limited energy to your plasma spear or your raiment even if you have depleted your reactor module. That is technically true, but the output is mediocre. VS responded. I also intended to keep it in reserve as another backup option. At worst, I intended to shock the unshakable king to paralysis with this organ. Regardless, you are correct for the most part. There are observers who grumble about the trickery that you have employed to secure your victory, but the important part is that you have remained standing while the unshakable king's body and his head have been returned to the UR Titans. It would have been within your rights to claim the latter, though. The secret department is quite upset that you have not chosen to surrender it to the secret keepers so that they could extract as much intelligence from the giant-sized brain as possible. Blinky shook his head. I truly considered this option, but I think we are putting the cart before the horse. Our overarching goal is to take control over the Phase Lord department. We must do so as convincingly as possible so that no rogue Ascended Giant chooses to disregard his orders and run off into the embrace of the Red Cabal. Just one defector can do immense damage to us all. This is why I still need to increase my appeal towards my future subordinates. This was a logical answer, though it still left the Red Collective dissatisfied at throwing away such a golden intelligence-gathering opportunity. My other self is about to undergo treatment and stuff. Is there anything else I should know before I join him and begin our preparations for the next duel? There are concerns from a growing number of people who have learned what you, or rather Blinky, has done to the unshakable king's companion spirit. What of it, Eliza? They have multiple concerns. How strong is Blinky? How well is he able to fight against other companion spirits? What are the consequences to the humans who have lost their companion spirits in such a traumatic fashion? Are there any specific methods that can bolster their defenses? It sounded as if Blinky's act of devouring the companion spirit of a powerful phase lord had truly spooked a lot of people. VS understood that he needed to offer reassurance if he wanted others to continue to make good use of his invention. Blinky is strong, but he is not the strongest companion spirit in existence. I know of dozens who can resist his methods and beat him up in a straight fight. He is not specialized in combat. He is an energy manipulator. The reason why he can bully weaker companion spirits around is because the latter has left the protection of their principles. If they just stayed inside the heads of their human counterparts, Blinky cannot easily intrude due to various reasons. You claim that there are at least dozens of companion spirits that can put up good resistance against Blinky. Who are they and what do they have in common? Oh, they are almost always the companion spirits of our high-ranking mech pilots. The strength of a companion spirit is partially based on age, but also based on the strength of their principles. A strong swordmaster or high-ranking mech pilot has a powerful spirit as well as extraordinary willpower. These qualities can easily be shared with a companion spirit. A companion spirit with access to extraordinary willpower is an unbeatable existence to Blinky. My companion spirit cannot devour such an entity because the willpower of a swordmaster or expert pilot is simply too resistant against E-energy manipulation. I see. Thank you for your candor. The Red Collective shall work to verify your responses, but we already expect your descriptions to be accurate to the best of your abilities. This was a necessary interrogation. Nobody with a companion spirit would like to see it turned into another companion spirit's meal. You can also tell the big shots of the RC that Blinky is fairly unique in many ways. VS spoke. It is not possible to nurture a companion spirit of his qualities with an ordinary companion spirit fruit. I meticulously created him by repurposing the remains of a powerful energy-based life form that has been likened to a dark god. This is why Blinky is able to punch above his weight. He is also practicing a cultivation method that has been meticulously improved and customized by my mother. Yeah, the centuries-old survivor of the fall of the Five Scrolls Compact. I enjoyed the 5-star treatment when it comes to companion spirits. Is it possible for others to receive the same treatment? Blinky decisively shook his head. Nope. I am willing to accept commissions to create a custom companion spirit so long as the price is right, but you have to solve the other problem yourself. Just getting the cooperation of a cultivator who is as good as my mother is a tall task. I think that she will only offer her services to the members of her bloodline, and that is only if I can't do a good enough job. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7182. Dark and Fast. Chapter 7182. Dark and Fast. 3 hours came and went faster than VS desired. Discussions continued to take place even as the challenger received treatment and prepared for the next duel. More than a handful of people initially expected that a mech designer turned human phase lord would only put up a symbolic fight. In fact, even the ascended giants themselves thought that there was no way a non-combatant could possibly put the unshakable king on the back foot. Suffice to say, all of their expectations broke as they heard or witnessed the dramatic downfall of the leader of the UR Titan phalanx. Whereas they previously assumed that VS only accepted the leadership challenge, so that he could somehow persuade the ascending giants to appoint him as their leader despite losing all 4 duels, they now thought he had a legitimate chance of winning 3 out of 4 duels. The ascended giants agreed to the terms with the assumption that the Dark Apostle was a less than competent fighter. Just possessing the right physique was not enough. He had to be able to know how to perform the right techniques and leverage the power of his muscles the right way in order to utilize his true body properly. He also had to gain enough fighting sense and fighting instincts in order to keep up with some of the best human fighters around. While the Dark Apostle had indeed demonstrated shortcomings in these areas, the gap between him and the unshakable king was much smaller than anyone expected. Combined with the obvious equipment advantage, it shouldn't have been a surprise that the unshakable king ultimately succumbed against the challenger. The ascended giants fell into disarray. Their assumptions of superiority changed when they witnessed a new approach to fighting. Instead of relying on factors such as skills, teamwork, and phase water organs to win their battles, they began to place greater importance on the quality and performance of their war gear. Their current equipment was not up to standard. Investment in the development of raiments and weapons suitable for phase lords had stalled in the last few months. That was not necessarily bad, as their equipment was still fairly modern, but the problem was that technology advanced at a rapid pace throughout the Red Ocean. New advances in phase water technology, superdimensional technology, hyper-technology, technology, material science, and so on kept pushing up the ceiling of what was possible with human technology. VS had fully tapped into these cutting-edge developments. He had received extensive support from the Red Collective. This was not a trivial declaration but a game-changing condition that enabled the challenger to gain access to some of the best tech and materials available to the superorganization. It was only now that the arrogant and conceited ascended giants recalled why the human race was able to dominate the Milky Way galaxy despite their mortal frailties. Humans had a strong affinity for technology and always maintained a high pace of innovation, especially when they came in touch with novel alien tech or brand new materials. As the Dark Apostle began to get cladded in a lighter raiment that was clearly aspect towards the darkness element, secret keeper Zerial 775 began to brief him on the latest intelligence. So what are the ascended giants up to this time? VS asked as Blinky lazily circled above the Dark Apostle's head. The shifty dark-robed spy actually looked quite fitting to remain in the presence of the Dark Apostle in his current loadout. Unlike the red and fiery Flame Lord raiment, the new Dark Wing raiment possessed a completely different look and feel. It lacked the mass and protection of the previous raiment. It was also devoid of anything related to the fire element. Just as its impromptu name suggested, the Dark Wing raiment was a light raiment that possessed a disproportionately large and powerful flight system. When VS examined it in detail, he noted that the Collies had probably borrowed an excellent flight system from a first-class mech design and hastily scaled it up to his true body's current proportions. It was an excellent design. Though it did not make inventive enough use of the darkness element, it was still an excellent flight system that possessed a good balance between instant acceleration and maximum output. What VS appreciated the most was its short response time. It was very difficult to ensure that it was able to change direction or generate a powerful impulse in a split second when it became a lot larger than before. Excellent engineering. Just because the Red Collective primarily invested in cultivation science did not mean it fell behind in other areas. In fact, it was pretty accurate to describe the Dark Wing raiment as a flight system that happened to be attached to an armored suit. VS wanted to allocate as little mass as possible to the raiment. Not because he wanted to reserve mass capacity for other equipment, but because he wanted to be as fast and nimble as possible. His next adversary was an offensive powerhouse. VS did not dare to rely on his raiment to tank her blows. Paired with a high-penetration spear that he called the Dark Tooth, the total package should be able to match the fiery axe in terms of speed and lethality. If the new Dharm was not enough to finish off the enemy Phase Lord, then the Dark Apostle could always fall back to the murder knife. VS briefly inspected the Dharm that had tasted the blood of an ascended giant shortly after its creation. The murder knife had grown in ways that he did not expect. He had not been completely serious when he designed and made it in a hurry. It seemed to have embraced its name. The minor demon that had been forced to inhabit the weapon also embraced its new purpose, at least for the time being. It had a strong incentive to remain useful to its current wielders. The murder knife was able to grow by leaps and bounds so long as it was used in killing rituals. This was the best way for it to become powerful enough to escape its current owners and earn its freedom. Of course, VS would never let this happen. He allowed the Dharm to indulge in its fantasies for the time being, but he would definitely crack down hard if the murder knife was about to launch its rebellion. Now that VS had gained the expertise of a competent demonologist, he knew exactly how to keep his demons in check. I think you will be happy to hear that the UR Titan Phalanx has appointed a much more sensible interim leader. Secret Keeper Zerial 775 responded to V's earlier question. The elite members of the UR Titan Phalanx have rallied behind Friedrich Safenka, the Grapple King, VS recalled. He's the champion who is a strong advocate to making the Ascended Giants independent. The biggest difference between him and the Unshakable King is that the new guy is not so eager to defect to the Red Cabal. Correct. The Grapple King is only the interim strategos for the time being. If you have taken over the Phase Lord department, it will be up to you to decide whether to confirm him as the new strategos or appoint a different Phase Lord to lead the UR Titans. What is your advice? We will need to gather more intelligence before we can provide you with qualified advice. We can do that much easier if you have won the leadership challenge. We advise you to remain patient and wait before you attempt to make your mark on the Phase Lord department. It is clear that we need to implement far-reaching reforms and personnel changes. This is the only way we can bring it back to order. The man made a sensible comment, but VS was not too sure if he was willing to let the RC implement so many changes. He wanted to be sure that if he risked his life to take over the Ascended Giants, he actually remained in charge and not a few shadowy bureaucrats from the Red Collective. An important means of retaining effective control over the department was to gain the loyalty of its most important leaders. If the Grapple King proved himself to be trustworthy enough, then VS was willing to give him a chance. If not, then VS should be able to pick one of the other 360 or so Ascended Giants to take charge over the UR Titans. Ideally, VS would like to put his own Larkin sons in charge of the different phalanxes, but that was not realistic for the time being. He had to make do with the current stock of Phase Lords for better or worse. How has the Fiery Axe responded to the first duel? VS asked another important question. I think you will be happy to learn that she has completely changed her impression of you. The robed and hooded figure responded. According to our scrying attempts, she has loudly praised your martial strength, and has gained great confidence that you can lead the Ascended Giants to success. Similar to the Grapple King, she is still a strong advocate to form an independent race, so I cannot imagine that she will remain happy if you insist on keeping them attached to Red Humanity. Blinky raised his paw and rubbed his furry chin in thought. If I follow the original plan and attempt to take her out, who will take her place? The Plasma Axe. He is a different sort of Ascended Giant than the Fiery Axe. The latter is a firebrand. She is always able to excite her men and exhort them to fight harder. Her overabundant passion compensates for her lacking administrative capabilities. The Plasma Axe neatly fills in her shortcomings. He is a more calculating and methodical individual. You can expect him to rely much more on logic. The downside is that he is not an inspiring leader and he is not known to perform well under time pressure. We also know relatively little about his true political stances. That sounds like he is better off if he remains the deputy of the Flesh Chopper Phalanx. We are eager to gain access to the databases of the headquarters of the Phase Lord Department. Zerial 775 vaguely said. So what special measures has the Fiery Axe taken to prepare for our duel? We have been able to ascertain that she has made last-minute demands to her armorers. She has insisted on removing as much redundant armor plating from her raiment as possible. It appears that she is doubling down on her offensive strategy. The next duel will likely end much faster. Neither of you are carrying much armor into battle, so as long as one of you is able to breach the spatial barrier, you can quickly move on to inflicting heavy and crippling injuries. This kind of high-speed battle came with its own set of challenges. The Dark Apostle needed to rely a lot more on instincts and experience, neither of which he had in abundance. There was only so much an enlightenment fruit could do to impart these strengths. However, the match could dramatically swing in the favor of the duelist who possessed a sufficient mobility advantage. The Ascended Giant that was faster and more agile could dictate the engagements and completely reduce the other combatant into a target dummy. This was why VS did not like what he just heard. Removing armor plating was not wise under normal circumstances, but it could make a big difference in the upcoming confrontation. I see. I do not think that there is much she could throw away. She will still be weighed down by whatever armor she has left her flight system and the energy needed to make it work and her formidable axes. Our gear should still be lighter, but the fiery axe likely has a phase water organ or two that significantly increases her mobility. This meant that it was more likely for the female phase lord to possess an edge in speed. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7183, Firecracker. Chapter 7183, Firecracker. The center of the dueling ground had been cleaned up. This left the Dark Apostle and the fiery axe with nothing to look at aside from each other. As both of them stepped onto the center plaza of the frozen planet, they both created a very different impression. If the challenger had entered this duel with his previous gear, then he would have resembled the strategos of the flesh chopper phalanx a lot more. His fire-respected weapon and raiment would have blended in nicely with the fiery axe's own fire hypergear. Unfortunately, the Dark Apostle chose to approach this fight in a completely different fashion. His raiment may be light, but it cast him in a darker and more ominous light. The dark wing raiment even exaggerated its moody look with a large flight system that on the surface resembled the partially folded wings of a bat. Paired together with the dark tooth and the murder knife, the Dark Apostle finally looked worthy of his moniker. Despite being steeped in negative energy, the Dark Apostle and his feline companion Spirit looked completely comfortable at the moment. Both had great resistance against the negative effects of exposure to the darkness element. They also placed a lot of confidence in their dharms. The minor demons that had been cast into the weapons and raiments had no chance to rebel against their maker. They could only bow their metaphorical heads and obediently toil for their masters. While the Dark Apostle made a strong impression with his exotic tech, the fiery axe managed to convey her own form of strength. Her red raiment looked awfully thin and no longer provided complete coverage. She had made the risky decision to remove a lot of the armor that previously covered her arms and legs. The female strategos only kept her bracers and a strong set of greaves which she could use to kick or maintain solid footing. At least she possessed enough sense to leave her helmet untouched, but it was questionable how long it would last once the fighting grew more intense. One curious feature about her helmet was that a flaming ponytail projected from the rear. This gave the fiery axe a more aggressive look and demeanor. The glowing red eyepieces further enhanced this effect. At this moment she held her iconic fiery axe against her shoulder pauldron. VS and the Dark Apostle distinctly noted that she had changed her mind about her weapon loadout. She had left the plasma axe behind, choosing to stake this entire fight on her axe. And her fists if necessary. This was good news. The fiery axe was an impressive piece of hyper-engineering, but it was not as lethal as the plasma axe when striking exposed flesh. The absence of the plasma axe, despite previously borrowing it from its owner and current wielder, served as tangible proof that the strategos no longer aimed to take the challenger's life. That said, no fight was truly safe. Giants swinging around large and dangerous weapons could still cause a lot of damage. Fiery axe. Dark Apostle. The female giant greeted back with obvious respect in her voice. It is an honor to meet you on the battlefield. You are not the progenitor that I constructed in my imagination. You are something better, more authentic. You are a worthy founder of our race. The Dark Apostle smiled. No one disliked compliments. Since you approve of me so much, how about you admit surrender the moment the duel commences? I am sorry, but I cannot do that. A leadership challenge is meant to test your limits and showcase how well you perform under adverse conditions. It wouldn't be much of a test if you can breeze past us without putting in any genuine effort. Your duel against the unshakable king revealed much already. For one, we have taken note of your ability to develop spears that explode with the force of a battleship-grade missile when thrown. I will not give you a chance to throw your spear again. I will do my best to test how you are able to hold your own when I am constantly in your face. She did not hide her outlook on the upcoming duel and what she intended to do. There was not much point in hiding it anyway. Anyone with decent tactical acumen could figure out these basic truths. The Dark Apostle did not look too disappointed. I see. I shall endeavor to show you that I can fend off high-speed opponents just as well as slow and more heavily armored ones. The Ascended Giants deserve to be led by a leader who can lead them from the front. Do not be misled by my origin as a mech designer. Just as my student Keddies can outfight any person with a sword, I am confident I can lead our units to victory against the native aliens and the mutated Vorabugs. When outfitted with the appropriate war gear, I might add. VS contributed to the side. The fiery axe pointedly stared at Blinky's manifestation. Your companion spirit is unusually active when you are in a fight. Blinky is the best companion spirit in existence. The Dark Apostle shamelessly boasted. He may not be the strongest, but his capabilities are unique and he has endless potential to tap into. As ascended giants, we should never imitate exobeasts and rely overwhelmingly on our physical dominance and our biological endowments to win our battles. If there is one lesson that we should imitate from the mortal humans, it is that technology and gear can serve as amazing force multipliers. On a real battlefield, no one cares about your ideas in terms of purity and honor. What I have shown to you all in the previous duel is just a taste of what you will encounter in a serious battle against our real enemies. The fiery axe lifted her weapon and held it in a more combat-ready stance. Then I look forward to seeing how you will fare this time. Let us give the rest of the ascended giants a good show. The brief talk between the two duelists was a lot more harmonious than the previous one. The unshakable king had to die. VS had no doubt about this decision. As for the fiery axe, he was a lot more ambivalent about it. Sure, she would have tried to take his life without any hesitation if he was weak, but now that he and his alter ego proved to be a lot more skilled and stronger than she initially expected, she had practically converted into becoming his fan. It was a drastic change of opinion that did not really make sense to VS. Only particularly emotional people such as Gloriana were capable of making such extreme swings. It was exactly because VS had experience with dealing with people like Gloriana that he was not able to place his full trust into the fiery axe. Since she was able to swing from one extreme position to another extreme position, she could easily reverse this change later on. The fiery axe could never be truly relied upon if VS and the Dark Apostle ever faltered and showed enough vulnerability. Therefore, even if the fiery axe sounded cheerful, respectful, and willing to subordinate herself to him, VS was seriously thinking whether she should meet her end during this duel. It may be better to remove an unstable factor from the board and put a more reliable and consistent ascended giant in her place. What do you think? VS privately communicated with his other self. I do not fear her, the Dark Apostle confidently responded. If I have grown weak enough that she decides to turn against me, then I deserve what is coming. I like her. I think I will keep her around, if only to motivate me to constantly improve my strength and make sure I will never make myself vulnerable to a leadership challenge from her. We all need a rival by our side in order to keep us on our toes. As his other personality, the Dark Apostle may possess completely different stances on many subjects, but he also inherited a lot of traits that were undeniably derived from VS. Blinky's eyes narrowed in suspicion. I hope you aren't thinking about what I am suspecting right now. We made a deal, mortal. You have your own life while I have mine. You have no right to meddle into my private affairs. Besides, it is far too soon to make a choice. There are 360 ascended giants, excluding myself. Even if a minority of them are of the right stock, that still gives me plenty of choice. If that is not enough, then I expect your support in expanding our numbers. We need more ascended giants in order to create a viable enough population for our fledgling race. That is assuming that ascended giants are even capable of biological procreation, which I very much doubt is the case. Do not dismiss the possibility before we have conducted even a single experiment. There may be something special about us human phase lords that sets us apart from the weirder alien ones. It may even be that the native aliens always had this capacity. Most of them never chose to do so because of cultural reasons or excessive demands. Where do you think new phase whales come from? A gestation chamber? Nobody knew how the phase whales reproduced when they never really had any mortals among them in the first place. Perhaps a few of the native aliens managed to discover the secret, but they were doing a good job of hiding the truth. However, if the phase whales were able to reproduce naturally, then human phase lords should be able to replicate the process, though that was not a guarantee. As VS continued to think about how the phase whales increased their population, a countdown appeared above the central plaza. He immediately shoved aside all distractions and focused on the situation at hand. 10. This time the Dark Apostle chose not to taunt his opponent. He merely stared at the fiery axe with a challenging gaze. 9. The female strategos met his eyes with her own confident stare. 8. Sparks seemed to fly between the two as they grew more and more excited about the fight to come. 7. Their light gear and their powerful arms would definitely cause the duel to start and end relatively quickly. 6. A single critical wound could decide the match already. 5. VS would have to pay careful attention to his true body and make sure to admit surrender as soon as it suffered a serious enough injury. 4. In order to win the leadership challenge, it was already enough to win 2 out of 4 duels as far as VS was concerned. 3. There was no need to take excessive risks at this point, as the first duel had already proved the Dark Apostle's fighting qualifications. 2. It should still be easier for the Dark Apostle to secure a win for the third duel, but the fourth duel should still be hopeless. 1. Then again, winning 3 out of 4 duels would save them a lot of trouble. Fight! The 2 ascended giants immediately exploded into action. Instead of charging straight at each other so that they could land the first blow onto each other, the Dark Apostle had made the sensible decision by turning around and trying to put as much distance between himself and his adversary. He was not being a coward. He was trying to be tactical. He needed to know how fast he was relative to his opponent. Who could move faster would determine the entire dynamics of this duel. The Dark Apostle initially smiled when he saw he was able to slightly accelerate faster than the fiery axe on a linear trajectory. While that did not necessarily mean he would retain his advantage when he started to maneuver around, this was already a good sign. However, the fiery axe quickly disabused him of the notion that he was faster. It seems like I need to put in a little more effort, haha. The fiery axe activated a phase water organ that surprisingly reduced her mass. Even if she only became 10 or 20% lighter, that was a significant reduction in mass, which meant that she was able to accelerate notably faster. She was catching up to the Dark Apostle. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7184 Enflamed Madness. Chapter 7184 Enflamed Madness. The duel went off to a quick start as both human phase lords zipped across the cold, airless environment of Jotunheim like racing shuttles. At first it appeared that the Dark Apostle held a decisive speed advantage. His more modern and optimized equipment granted him a distinct advantage in linear acceleration. The bat wing-shaped flight system was able to produce greater thrust and push the challenger forward with slightly greater power than the competition. Yet the fiery axe did not stay behind for long. She started gaining progress by lowering her mass with the help of a special phase water organ. This was an unusual choice of organ. Most phase lords developed an obsession for becoming the biggest, heaviest, and strongest of their kind. They constantly sought to increase their phase water concentration in order to grow bigger and achieve physical superiority over their peers. Mass was everything to a phase lord. Mass was responsible for increasing their dimensions. Mass protected them from damage and injuries. Mass conveyed greater physical might and endurance. This was why the Marigal organ was such a popular choice among martial phase lords. Although its inclusion increased the mass and density of a phase lord by a hefty margin, it was often worth it because the changes conformed to their obsession. The fiery axe turned out to be a deviant who chose a less conventional development route. Instead of trying to turn into meaty tanks that could withstand a lot of hits and dish out heavy attacks in return, she adopted a fighting paradigm that had a lot in common with light mechs. She sacrificed brute force in exchange for mobility. Though her reduced mass and her weaker true body brought several disadvantages, she could still make it work so long as she made excellent use of her advantages. Right now she clearly gained the upper hand in the race due to her superior acceleration. The acceleration of an object could be calculated in several ways, but one of them was by dividing the net force acting on the body with its mass. In a situation where the thrust power of her flight system and her own inherent flight capabilities as a phase lord remained constant, lowering her mass by 10 to 20% actually yielded a slightly greater proportionate increase in acceleration rate. For example, reducing the mass by 10% yielded an increase in acceleration rate by 11.11111%. A reduction in mass by 20% resulted in a more exaggerated increase in acceleration rate by 25%. If the fiery axe became powerful enough to reduce her mass by 50% in the future, she would effectively be able to improve her acceleration rate by 100%. That meant that she was able to speed up twice as fast as before, which was a shocking advantage, especially when fighting against enemies that adopted a similar approach to combat. This was when VS realized that the Dark Apostle was in serious trouble at the moment. Even if the differences were not too big due to the fiery axe's immature phase water organ and lack of proficiency in its use, it was still enough for her to gain the initiative in this duel. Of course, her hits would not strike as hard due to her reduced mass, but that did not matter too much when the Dark Apostle's raiment was fairly light on armor. The Dark Wing raiment was much thinner and less robust than the Flame Lord raiment. The fiery axe also utilized a combination of high technology and hyper-technology to activate a superheated blade that was practically on fire, enabling it to inflict burning wounds that generated greater pain and could not be regenerated as easily as wounds caused by cold alloy blades. As the female phase lord came close enough to be able to chop down her axe onto the Dark Apostle's rear, the latter clearly could not sustain this race any longer. The challenger turned and met the incoming fiery axe with the shaft of the Dark Tooth. Fire and darkness collided at a single location, causing an eruption of energy that soon saw the two phase lords bounce away from each other. The shaft of the Dark Tooth gained a shallow cut mark. It still lit up in heat before it cooled a few seconds later. Upon the moment of impact, a small wave of fire energy had splashed across the Dark Apostle's lightly armored body. Fortunately, the damage inflicted by this secondary effect was minimal. The dark miasma that cloyed sickly around the Dark Wing raiment had successfully managed to neutralize the fire attack. The two duelists only remained separated for a short amount of time before they converged again. Aha again. The fiery axe became increasingly more affected by her lust for battle. She threw aside much of her complicated thoughts and fully dedicated herself towards high-speed martial struggle. Her lighter mass gave her enough of an edge in acceleration to feel she could dictate the confrontations. Right now she wanted to stick to her adversary and never let go. Frenzy or not, she still remembered what her opponent could do if given a chance to throw his spear, so the fiery axe decided to defeat the progenitor before he could reproduce this technique. This put the Dark Apostle at an immediate disadvantage. Knowing that there was not much point in running, he decided to be more proactive and launch as many counterattacks towards the fiery axe as possible. This was not supposed to be difficult, as he had designed the Dark Tooth for this kind of confrontation. Its shaft was thick and dense enough to resist plenty of axe blows, and its length was shorter in order to improve its performance in intense close-quarters combat. For a short amount of time their weapons repeatedly struck against each other. The Dark Apostle found himself on the defensive more often than not. The fiery axe may not be the largest and most heaviest axe-type weapon that a Phase Lord could wield, but it still possessed enough mass and a chopping edge to be able to inflict a crippling injury with a single good strike. What was more important was that the fiery axe was also capable of inflicting greater than-average damage to spatial barriers. The Dark Apostle's spatial barrier often bore the brunt of his failures to intercept and block the female Phase Lord's aggressive attacks. In the few times that the Dark Apostle launched a counterattack, his Dark Tooth inflicted substantially less damage to his adversary's spatial barrier. The good news was that the fiery axe apparently neglected to implant any phase water organs that could strengthen her spatial barrier. The bad news was that each time the Dark Apostle landed a sharp hit with his spear, the fiery axe was able to land her own counterblow in return. This was an exchange that was not in the Dark Apostle's favor. He tried his best to compensate by leveraging the minor demons locked in his Dark Tooth, but all it did was to make the weapon spread more dark clouds that did not seem to affect the fiery axe all that much. The fire energy released from her raiment and iconic weapon burned away much of the ambient darknessy energy. Her raiment also protected her from the subtle influence of the corruption orb. During the previous preparation time, VS had arranged for the corruption orb to be taken out of the damaged but surviving Flame Lord raiment and installed into its dedicated pocket of the Dark Wing raiment. The fit between the two artifacts was much higher. The Dark Wing raiment seemed to come alive with the integration of a small but potent source of darkness energy and other negative energies. It made the raiment so much more dangerous and intimidating that the technicians responsible for inspecting it and preparing it for deployment could not stand being in its presence for long. Yet this time VS discovered that the fiery axe did not show any obvious signs of being affected by the corrupting aura of the Dark Wing raiment. One of the game plans that VS and the Dark Apostle had devised was to repeat one of the gambits from the previous duel. 1747. They had achieved considerable success by using the corrupting orb to make the unshakable king more irrational and less able to control himself. Yet this time it didn't work in the slightest. When VS studied the leader of the Flesh Chopper Phalanx with greater attention, he could see that this was not a coincidence. Aside from relying on the fire-themed raiment to burn away the ominous clouds of corruption that came close enough, she was also relying heavily on her companion's spirit to keep her mind pure by metaphorically lighting it on fire. It did not surprise VS at all that the fiery axe had chosen to develop a companion spirit that had already attained notable success in practicing a fire chi cultivation method. The companion spirit now served as one of the strongest defenders of her principal's mind. Spiritual flames continued to burn inside the woman's massive skull. Though it practically rendered the companion spirit useless for other tasks, it didn't matter due to the importance of his current mission. The companion spirit's job was not to keep the fiery axe sober. This was impossible because fire energy was filled with passion, fury, and excitement. So that was exactly what the companion spirit tried to promote. The spiritual flames not only served as a firewall against contamination, but also fired up the female Phase Lord, and caused to become completely engrossed in the duel. This alone served as a powerful form of protection against the negativity that the corrupting orb attempted to insert into the fiery axe. Even if the touch of darkness was somehow able to bypass the protective flames, they could find no purchase in the fiery axe's mind because it was already dedicated to the fight. In other words, there was no opportunity to drive the fiery axe irrational and insane because she had proactively embraced her own madness. Ha 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 ha. Again. Taste my fiery blows. The fiery axe grew more excited as she fought. Her axe blows repeatedly clanged against the shaft of the Dark Tooth. Her attacks did not show much variation. She didn't bother to pull off any feints, which meant that her opponent could easily read her moves and block them in time. However, her attack frequency was so high that the Dark Apostle was no longer able to launch any counterattacks. If he dared to stop his blocking efforts, he would just get struck with a flaming axe, and that was quite a serious outcome. Right now, the Dark Apostle had given up on trying to launch any counterattacks. He just wanted to survive the current sequence and wait for an opening to arise. There was no way the fiery axe could sustain her offensive rhythm for too long. She was burning energy like mad in an effort to tear down her opponent in the fastest possible speed. The Dark Apostle found that as long as he focused his all on defense, his energy consumption was not as high. He would be able to win the long game, but only if the fiery axe failed to land a hit and only if the Dark Tooth was able to withstand so many axe blows. The dark tooth won't last at this rate. VS pessimistically informed his other self. The power of her blows is weaker due to her reduced mass, but if she can't chop our spear in half with 20 blows, then 50 may be enough, especially if she strikes the same section of the spear shaft. You need to switch up your strategy because this is not a winning trajectory. How was the Dark Apostle able to do that when he suffered a distinct mobility disadvantage? So long as he was not able to outspeed his adversary, he would not be able to take the initiative. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Chapter 7185 Fire Dancer. Chapter 7185 Fire Dancer. As much as VS attempted to toughen up the Dark Tooth, so that it could block as many axe strikes as possible, there was a limit to what he could do with the available tech and high-grade materials. The fiery axe was still a custom-developed weapon commissioned by one of the Phalanx leaders of the Phase Lord Department. It was a remarkable weapon that retained its edge under heavy abuse and could produce lots of heat and flames depending on the commands of its wielder. Right now the fiery axe channeled so much energy in her physical exertions as well as the high-tech systems of her main weapon that it was doubtful whether she could sustain her current intensity for an entire hour. She was amazing in combat. Although she lacked the raw strength and endurance of the unshakable king, the fiery axe was probably the fastest ascending giant. She not only moved fast but intimately knew how to fight at this frenetic pace. Her fighting skills had been thoroughly ingrained in her instincts. She no longer needed to be conscious about every move or attack as her body naturally executed the appropriate attacks. That was not the extent of her power. Her companion spirit also played an important role. Though it had not made an appearance out of fear of getting devoured by Blinky, her companion spirit had clearly developed in the direction of a chi cultivator who specialized in the manipulation of fire-attributed energy. Although its relative youth and lack of progression kept it fairly weak, it was already making significant contributions by augmenting her principal's performance. The companion spirit attracted a lot of fire energy. It regulated the interaction between fire energy and her fire hyper equipment. It also kept the corrupting darkness emanating from the Dark Apostle at bay. In short, the companion spirit might not play a flashy role during this duel, but its assistance complemented the fiery axe extremely well. This caused the fight between the two to appear a lot more explosively than the previous duel. If the battle between the Dark Apostle and the Unshakable King could be characterized as a thoughtful and methodical chess match, then the clash between the Dark Apostle and the fiery axe could be equated to a dance contest. The two dancers did not remain stationary at all. They continually circled around each other in order to gain superior positioning or to confuse their opponent. Those with poor eyesight could only catch glimpses of black and red auras spinning and dashing above the surface of Jotunheim like they were fireworks. The power of darkness and fire continually collided against each other, seeking to gain the upper hand over the other. During this clash, the power of darkness proved to be stronger, denser, and higher in quality. However, the power of fire nonetheless gained the upper hand because the fiery axe was much more invested in the fight. The techniques employed by her and her companion spirit were not that complicated. They were lacking in depth and possessed very specific applications, many of which only served to amplify existing phenomena. However, that was exactly what she needed to maximize her utilization of the fire element in the short term. By leveraging the power of fire to increase the damage of her axe, increase the output of her flight system, and make her body move faster and more fluently, her techniques were just what she needed to gain an edge over her opponent. More importantly than that was her overflowing enthusiasm. Her passion was overflowing and her excitement at dueling a worthy opponent grew by the second. It was very clear that she was a momentum-based fighter. The more she became engrossed in the fight, the harder she struck and the faster she moved. This perfectly resonated with the more volatile aspects of the fire element. This meant that the fire element fueled the ascended giant and amplified her offensive to an increasingly stronger degree. What a terrible opponent! No wonder she had managed to earn her place as the strategos of the flesh chopper phalanx. The Dark Apostle, on the other hand, was not as prone to entering in this kind of mood. He was hardly able to enjoy his current situation at the moment. Since he was the slower among the two duelists, he had immediately been put in a passive situation where he could only block the continuous axe strikes. The Dark Tooth had never been designed to withstand endless axe strikes. Axes were actually the most suitable weapon type to use to break apart shields and weapons. The challenger found himself at a terrible disadvantage, but he had no way of sparing his main weapon the abuse because he was not able to create any distance. VS had made a bet that adopting a high mobility configuration was the best choice for the second duel. If the Dark Apostle was able to match or exceed the fiery axe's speed, then he would have won the bet. His alter ego would have been able to fight against this flaming giant on even terms. Unfortunately, it appeared that he had lost the bet. He underestimated how extreme the fiery axe dedicated herself towards increasing her mobility. This speed disparity put the Dark Apostle on the back foot as his responses were slower and his positioning was always worse. As VS observed the ongoing struggle from a slightly more detached perspective, he realized that there was only one way out of this undesirable situation. Your loadout this time is highly unsuited for defense. You need to go on the attack. I am reluctant to say this given that it is my true body as well, but you need to abandon any thoughts on defense. You need to go on the attack. If that means that you have to absorb a lot of hits, then so be it. Your spatial barrier can serve as a momentary buffer, but it will be a lot more dangerous for you if it pops. Try to redirect as many strikes towards your frontal armor as possible. The armor plating is thin but not negligible. It can probably block one solid attack, especially now that the fiery axe has exchanged power for speed. The Dark Apostle slightly widened his giant eyes in realization. That was an important reminder. The fiery axe artificially reduced her mass, which meant that she was able to attack more frequently but couldn't put as much force and momentum behind her strikes. This meant that her threat level was not as high as he feared. He could take advantage of this situation. He just needed to inflict more damage than his adversary. Several new options came to mind that he previously did not consider. It was not enough to strike back with ordinary spear stabs. He was unable to match the fiery axe in terms of attack frequency. This was a race that he had already lost. The only way he could still outmatch her in terms of offense was to make one of his strikes inflict as much damage as 5 or even 10 of her axe chops. It only took one good attack to change the entire outlook of this duel. He needed to land a blow that was heavy enough to interrupt his adversary's momentum and weaken her ability to maintain her offensive rhythm. Only the power moves of the newly acquired demonic possession spearmanship method could suffice. The Dark Apostle could turn the battle around with a single well-aimed and well-executed technique. He would have to make another gamble, but this time he intended to win. The momentum of the high-speed duel shifted at this point. The fiery axe remained quite sharp despite being so invested in her attack sequence. A vicious grin appeared on her face. Instead of backing off, she doubled down on her offensive. That's the spirit. Fight me. It is too boring for me to hit a target dummy. I need a real challenge. She squeezed more potency out of her phase water organs. She even chose to burn a part of her phase water reserves in order to reduce her mass by a few more percentage points. This caused her to burn hotter and speed up even further. Despite her words, her increased attack frequency made it even more difficult for the Dark Apostle to abandon any thought of defense and launch a power move by force. The challenger gritted his teeth and forcefully withdrew his weapon that was already scarred with marks along its length. The fiery axe did not take long to capitalize on the opening. She darted forward with incredible speed and struck the Dark Apostle's spatial barrier with considerable force. She did not retreat. Instead, she had adopted a different posture and began to wail on the flickering energy barrier with repeated strikes. Each blow with her axe generated a burst of flames. These flames did not flicker out immediately but lingered and began to stick onto the spatial barrier. Burn, burn, burn. The more times she struck the spatial barrier, the more she stoked the flames. This reminded VS on how St. Isabel Coton liked to destroy her targets. Although the specific methods were completely different, the overall approach was similar. VS suddenly made a profound realization. The fiery axe's combat approach finally made sense. Lowering her mass allowed her to attack faster at the cost of weakening the power of her blows. This meant that her attacks might have difficulty overcoming the defenses of particularly tough opponents. However, if she was able to combine her hyper-technology and her fire manipulation to set fire on her target and continually feed it with every attack, then that would ensure that she could eventually fell against any tough opponent. It was a brilliant approach that elevated her offensive prowess and turned her into a much more troublesome adversary. Due to her amazing attack speed, the fiery axe was quickly able to turn the initial flames into a wildfire. The Dark Apostle's spatial barrier suffered continuous damage and was rapidly losing its integrity. It even threatened to break before the challenger was able to complete the process of accumulating energy and unleash his power move. My axe will taste your flesh soon enough. The Dark Apostle did his best not to let the raging ascended giant affect his concentration. Although the Enlightenment fruit had imparted him with the right technique, he had never executed it under heavy pressure. A lot was at stake. He keenly understood that the fate of his leadership challenge may depend on the outcome of his next move. This was why he had chosen to pull off the offensive power move that he had the greatest confidence in pulling off successfully. It was not the most powerful or the most destructive of extraordinary spear techniques, but it happened to suit him a lot better than the others. Its mechanics also happened to overlap with the knowledge and expertise imparted by another Enlightenment fruit that VS had swallowed in the past. Due to this overlap, the Dark Apostle was able to complete all of the steps with greater understanding and familiarity. VS even helped out by letting Blinky release a large amount of darkness energy from the Blinkyverse. The effects grew increasingly more obvious. The Dark Tooth became engulfed in a dark miasma that radiated a lot of threat. Gravity and other forces seemed to stagnate and weaken in its vicinity. As the spear grew increasingly darker and more ominous, the Dark Apostle felt he had almost become one with Blinky and the Dharm. Together they all worked to drive the cloying spear forward and strike at the fiery axe with extraordinary might and speed. Withering Thrust. Chapter 71-86 Sputtering Flames. Chapter 71-86 Sputtering Flames. The Withering Thrust was not a pure darkness spear technique. It also involved concepts such as death decay wood and so on. It was a relatively more complicated technique to pull off for a pure wielder of darkness. Fortunately, VS had gained an artificial foundation in the Withering Curse from an enlightenment fruit, so he happened to be able to meet these troublesome requirements. This was why the Withering Thrust was the most suitable technique for him and the Dark Apostle, despite being way more complicated than many other techniques. The Withering Thrust that the Dark Apostle just pulled off relied heavily on the Dark Tooth and Blinky to gain its power and structure. Both of them constituted rather potent sources of power, so the threat posed by the Withering Thrust immediately caused alarm bells to ring in the Fiery Axe's mind. Unfortunately, she was already fully committed to attacking. She had the opportunity to retreat sooner, but instead she chose to stay and wear down her opponent's spatial barrier as soon as possible. Since this was the case, she may as well stick her chosen direction to the end. Shatter. The burning spatial barrier finally couldn't withstand the abuse any longer and shattered after the Fiery Axe landed another blow. However, the Dark Apostle could no longer be stopped. Before the Fiery Axe could land another attack, the Dark Tooth shot forward like a predator pouncing on its prey. The ominous Dark Spear first struck the spatial barrier. It became very clear that defense was not the Fiery Axe's best trait. She had passed over the decision to integrate phase water organs that could upgrade her first line of defense multiple times. That said, that was normally not a terrible decision because the most basic spatial barriers were already fairly strong from the onset. It should easily be able to resist a single blow even if it came from a transphasic hyper weapon. Yet this was not a normal weapon. The Dark Tooth was not only a Dharm, but its wielder executed a powerful technique that massively amplified its damage potential. Although the spear did not collide against the spatial barrier with an overwhelming amount of force, its corrosive and destructive energies wore down the energy defense so much that it broke in less than a second. That should not be possible. The Fiery Axe became completely astonished by the fact that the Dark Tooth was able to puncture through her spatial barrier in a single blow. Not only that, but it still had enough force left over to pierce through her raiment and make a shallow cut into her chest cavity. The Fiery Axe let out a bestial roar and immediately used her weapon to slap away the spear before it could be pushed any deeper. It hurts. The woman formerly known as Phasia Melator had always prided herself on her toughness and her ability to endure hardships. Yet the pain inflicted by a shallow puncture wound from a dark spear inflicted more pain than she had suffered in the past. When the Fiery Axe briefly lowered her head to inspect the rather small and unassuming wound, she grew pensive when she saw that a high concentration of darkness energy had infected her injury. Her companion spirit's flames were desperately trying to douse this dark infection. While the fire was making limited progress in excising the darkness, it proved to be incredibly persistent. It did not help that there was a clear gap between the two energies. The darkness energy and other negative energies formed the structure of a modified Withering Curse. It continually sapped the Fiery Axe's energy. The flesh around the stab wound aged at a rapid rate. The biological cells affected by this dark infection would not survive longer than 2 days. The best way to prevent this from happening was to counter or neutralize the threat. My fire shall cleanse my flesh. This was what the Fiery Axe had been doing on instinct already. More and more fire energy concentrated on her wound, however none offered any salvation. The compromised cells withered with every passing second. The power of darkness drained them of all of their vitality, strength, and purpose. The cells that offered the weakest resistance succumbed first. They did not die completely. They weakened until they lost almost all of their original functions. In exchange, they gained the power to spread their withering corruption. The affected cells turned black before turning against the body that spawned them in the first place. A part of the Fiery Axe grew horrified when she discovered that she was being attacked by her own flesh. The Withering Curse continued to spread like a slow-moving wildfire. Her injury would continue to expand and debilitate her further. It would be especially alarming if the corruption spread to one of her nearby phase water organs. She could not allow that to happen. The Fiery Axe gritted her teeth. She immediately came up with a reckless and undoubtedly painful idea. A normal person would have hemmed and hawed for a while before making the decision. She did not waste any time. From the moment she thought it was viable, she instantly made her move. She raised her axe before pressing its burning blade right against her wound at her chest. The Fiery Axe screamed in pain as she forcibly burned away the withered and corrupted flesh. Though her reckless move could not go deep enough to affect the blackened cells that were buried deeper in her body, she successfully neutralized the corruption that had settled closer to the exterior of her true body. In an instant she had burned away most of the infection, choosing to inflict immediate damage to her true body in order to spare herself from greater debilitation. She let out another roar. I am the axe that brings fire. I am the conflagration that burns planets. I fear no pain. Fire is my ally. The darkness shall flee before the heat. Her words centered her thoughts and enabled her to pull through her pain. She successfully dealt with her crisis before lifting her axe with slightly greater difficulty than before. Her grin grew wider as she truly felt challenged by the Dark Apostle for the first time since they commenced this duel. This is round 2. The fiery axe renewed her offensive. What was amazing was that she did not seem to have slowed down in any way. Her attacks struck the Dark Apostle with almost the same force and frequency as before. Though her rhythm had become a little more disordered, it didn't matter, as her sheer grit and determination sustained her offensive and caused the challenger's raiment to suffer numerous armor breaches. The Dark Apostle was taken aback. He assumed that his withering strike would have been powerful enough to not only punch through her spatial barrier in a single go but also strike her flesh and spread a curse fueled by concentrated darkness. He never expected her to deal with this tricky and troublesome curse by employing the brain-dead method of simply using her burning axe to cauterize her wound. This was a serious oversight on VS and the Dark Apostle's part, and now their true body suffered for their mistake. Pulling off the previous power move sapped a lot of energy from them. Their true body was not used to executing such a burdensome move and could not perform another demonic possession spearmanship technique in a short amount of time. This meant that the Dark Apostle had no choice but to remain passive and do his best to block as many axe attacks as possible. He made an immediate strategic decision. He allowed the axe attacks that were likely to hit the undamaged portions of his raiment through. At the same time, he resolutely blocked the attacks that targeted the sections that had already incurred serious damage. At the same time, he continually shifted his grip on his spear while also rotating the shaft to change its surface orientation towards the fiery axe. This allowed the Dark Apostle to endure significantly longer. His true body had yet to suffer a truly devastating axe strike, while his dark tooth was able to hold out longer, though it gained scars at a terrifying speed. The fiery axe did not seem to care. Her mind was on fire and her axe burned hotter, as her only solution to all of her problems was to attack. Of course, every attack splashed fire onto the Dark Apostle. The dispersed distribution of every strike prevented the flames from overlapping and turning into a more serious threat for the time being, but who knew when it would last. Blinky immediately took care of the threat. Unlike the fiery axe, the Starcat was able to deal with the persistent flames with an easy solution. He opened his maw and began to devour all of the fire energy that granted extraordinary traits to the fire and made them so dangerous and persistent. The influx of fire energy had no time to burn Blinky before it all disappeared into the Blinkyverse, where it would harmlessly integrate into a vast imaginary universe. In this way, the Dark Apostle neutralized one of the fiery axe's attack vectors and prevented her from gaining too much of an advantage during this fight. Not that the female ascended giant minded all that much. She became more delighted when she realized that her current target dummy would be able to last longer. Ha 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 ha. My pain is nothing compared to the pleasure of swinging my axe. More. Give me more. Her momentum seemed to grow even stronger out of the blue. If she was not a mech pilot, then VS might have mistaken her for an expert pilot due to how her will strengthen her combat performance. Both VS and the Dark Apostle understood that they were quickly running out of time. If they wanted to squeeze out a victory from this duel, then they needed to make a more serious sacrifice in order to reverse victory and defeat. If only the Dark Apostle could gain enough distance to throw his spear. The Dark Tooth was not solely designed to function as a medium to channel darkness energy. It was also capable of exploding with great force. That was when the human Phase Lord came up with an inventive solution. As long as he was willing to pay a real price and expose one of his trump cards, he was confident he could end this duel before it grew any worse. He immediately conveyed his idea to VS, whose cooperation was vital for this gambit. Blinky immediately frowned. Your idea has merit, but are you sure you want to end this duel this way? It will feel like cheating. I don't care. We are merely making use of one of our inherent strengths, so we are still operating within the rules. It is already good enough that we have been able to put up a good showing in front of the fiery axe. The Ascended Giants should have developed a better impression of me. This can easily change if I start to suffer serious injuries due to my stubbornness. Let us end it now before it can grow any worse. Trump cards are meant to be used. The stakes are too high to leave it unused. Just make sure to invest enough energy to end this duel in the next attack. Since you don't intend to perform a traditional power move, we won't be able to succeed unless we make a serious investment. Get ready. Blinky secretly began to mobilize energy, but the fiery axe was sharp enough to sense the rapidly escalating threat from her adversary. She became more frantic and began to land more blows onto the Dark Apostle's raiment. In a few instances, she even managed to strike deep enough to cut and burn the surface of his true body. Yet the Dark Apostle took these wounds in stride and began to grin back at the Medwoman. You have fought well, woman, but the time has come to bring this duel to its inevitable conclusion. Have a taste of my true strength. The Dark Apostle no longer used his spear to defend himself but instead thrust it out with such speed that the fiery axe could not avoid its tip. Initially the fiery axe did not feel too threatened because the Dharm did not accumulate enough darkness energy to pull off a power move. Yet she soon became alarmed when she saw that it glowed with a different and considerably more potent kind of energy. This bright white glow contrasted sharply against the darkness that emanated from the dark tooth. As soon as the tip of the spear struck her in her belly, it pierced through the raiment and sunk deeper into her tough phase water-reinforced flesh, as if it was a Saint Piercer arm. When it had finally reached a respectable amount of depth, the remaining extraordinary energies exploded, causing the fiery axe to suffer a disastrous internal wound that affected multiple of her phase water organs. She roared in pain instead of excitement this time and fell back with all thoughts of attacking had finally disappeared. Her true body grew heavier while her flames had dimmed. She had already become half-crippled by a single attack from the Dark Apostle. The challenger did not expect any other result. Blinky had invested a whopping 41% of his Warclaw energy reserves to empower his last attack. It would have been a surprise if the fiery axe had been able to withstand this move. Although the Dark Apostle was only left with 50% of his Warclaw energy reserves, he did not regret the sacrifice. Mostly. Chapter 7187, The Respect of the Strong. Chapter 7187, The Respect of the Strong. Although the Dark Apostle had demonstrated the capacity to channel Warclaw energy in the previous match, his latest attack still caught the fiery axe by surprise. The injury inflicted by the Dark Tooth did not impart too much darkness energy this time. The female ascended giant immediately ignored the lingering corruption spread by this small amount of darkness. What concerned her much more was the massive trauma inflicted by the explosion of Warclaw energy. Its quantity was not too much, but its potency was fairly high. The Dark Tooth managed to punch deeply enough to unleash a destructive blast inside her internal cavity, causing serious tears and bruising to her phase water organs. Their vulnerability to damage was much greater than her flesh and bones. Moderate damage was already enough to impair their functionality and disrupt their usage. One of the consequences of this singularly powerful blow was that the phase water organ responsible for reducing her mass operated considerably less effective than before. The fiery axe was only able to lighten her mass by around 8 to 9%, which was much weaker than before. Her other capabilities got affected as well. The wound debilitated her physical movements, making it harder for her to sustain her momentum if she wanted to regain her offensive rhythm. Her eyes burned with unwillingness. She could still fight, but she was in a worse physical condition compared to her opponent. There was an even greater issue at hand. The Warclaw energy blast occupied her so much that the Dark Apostle had been able to retreat from her until he reached optimal throwing distance. His next move became clear as he assumed a classical throwing stance. The Dark Tooth, though chipped and damaged on the surface, was still intact enough to serve as an adequate throwing weapon. Right now the Dark Apostle held the spear near its but where a familiar Audiobook throwing mechanism had unfolded. Darkness energy slowly got infused into the weapon, causing it to slowly prime itself for a lethal explosion. Unlike the unshakable king, the fiery axe knew that she did not possess the defenses to withstand a direct or maybe even a glancing hit. Trying to dodge the spear once thrown still gave her a chance to evade the deadly strike, but the problem was that she was unable to move as quickly as before. Given how skilled the Dark Apostle managed to throw his weapon the last time, the fiery axe instinctively knew that it would have been a long shot to successfully evade the spear throw even if she was still in peak condition. She could only draw one conclusion from this standoff. For all intents and purposes, the Dark Apostle put the fiery axe into checkmate. There was no other way to interpret this situation. The fiery axe had run out of solutions. Her only way to avoid a massive explosion in her face was to stick close to her opponent and never let him get away. She failed. He got away long enough to achieve his win condition. The only reason why she had not yet become overwhelmed by an exploding spear was because the Dark Apostle had yet to commit to the attack. While he was technically priming his Dark Tooth, it had not yet reached the point of no return. He could still retract the darkness energy and return the weapon to its dormant state. The fiery axe couldn't help but calm down and relax. She stared across the void that separated her from the Dark Apostle and gazed at him with respect. The first duel already convinced her that the challenger was a worthy fighter, but it was only now that she had locked weapons against him in person that she truly lost her will to resist. She symbolically let go of her fiery axe, causing the weapon to gently float out of her reach. Her stance grew less defiant and combatant. The fire energy that previously fueled her aggression went out as her companion spirit took the initiative to stop as well. Her threat level dropped significantly. Even if she intended to deceive her current opponent, it would take precious seconds to relight her fire and pick up her weapon again. This was more than enough time for the Dark Apostle to fully prime his exploding spear and throw it in her direction with great power. By doing all of this, the fiery axe conveyed a silent message to her adversary. The Dark Apostle remained frozen as he contemplated his next move. Blinky hovered next to the human phase lord with concern. Are you sure you want to spare her this time? VS asked his other personality. Do not forget that she was ready to condemn us to death before the duel. The Dark Apostle minutely shook his head. She voiced these intentions in private and before she knew a single thing about my real self. It makes sense for her to despise a weak challenger. I would have harbored the same intentions if I was in her shoes. What matters is that I have proved her wrong in the most convincing fashion possible. There is no way she will betray my trust and turn against me now that I have given her a taste of my unfathomable might. Or might not yours. You wouldn't have stood a chance against this maniac if you did not have access to my gear and other perks. VS reminded his other personality. Whatever the case, I can see the advantages of sparing her and winning her over. If you can gain her allegiance, she will become your strongest cheerleader within the Ascended Giants. You will be able to retain her full support so long as you can still beat her in a fight. The moment this changes, I do not think she will hesitate to contest your leadership. Are you truly willing to subject yourself to this hidden danger? The Ascended Giant did not respond verbally to VS, but he minutely nodded to convey his answers. He instead directed his attention to the fiery axe. After staring in her dimming eyes for over a minute, he felt he had formed a silent accord with the female strategos. The Dark Apostle slowly retracted his power from the Dark Tooth and aborted the effort to execute the sacrificial spear-throwing method. The minor demon that resided in the Dharm felt incredibly glad that he and his current abode was not about to blow up. The deviant artifact spirit did everything in his power to wind down and release the darkness energy that was previously attempting to prime the weapon to explode. Demons also wanted to live. As the Dark Tooth returned to a more dormant state, both Ascended Giants relaxed. They no longer saw each other as enemies anymore. Instead, the two gained a growing sense of kinship. The earlier fight caused both of them to develop a good understanding of each other's true selves. The Dark Apostle understood what drove the fiery axe while the female strategos comprehended a part of his ambition. They had no problem with each other's motivations. After confirming that neither of the two had any fundamental reason to reject coexistence and cooperation, they dropped their guard and accepted each other's presence. This was how some fighters resolved their hostility and misunderstandings. As long as the conditions were right, it was not that difficult for enemies to become lifelong comrades. While it was too early to tell whether the Dark Apostle and the fiery axe would develop such a bond, they were already off to a good start. You have convinced me with your strength. The fiery axe took the initiative to speak. You have done well to withstand my attacks and find a way to turn the tables against me. I am glad that I have proven myself formidable enough to make you work for it. That last attack is certainly a doozy. I will not insult you by asking how you have come to master such a power. You have already won my approval even without taking this exotic means into account. If you are able to take over from the oscillating fist, then it would be my pleasure to serve at your side. It was a bit improper for the fiery axe to speak about this before the leadership challenge had come to an end. After all, there were still 2 more duels to go, though their importance had diminished now that it had come to this point. Still, if the Dark Apostle lost the next 2 duels, it was important for him to earn the vote of as many Ascended Giants as possible. He needed to appeal to the rank-and-file giants and ensure that he would not change too much about their lives if he assumed leadership over the Phase Lord department. The Dark Apostle lowered his spear and inclined his head. If I have won the leadership challenge, then I am not opposed to having you continue to lead the Flesh Chopper phalanx. That said, I will not stop others from mounting reasonable challenges to you. If there are other Ascended Giants who think they have a better shot of leading your unit, then I will not stop them from following our new traditions. The fiery axe grinned. That is fair. I like it a lot. I have grown tired of obeying the stupid commands from rear echelon bastards who have never stared down the barrel of a gun in their entire careers. A true leader among our race must have the courage to lead from the front and face challenges from behind. Only this kind of leader is worthy to command our race. I truly hope that you will be able to take over the mantle from the oscillating fist. As strong as he may be, he is too indecisive outside of the battlefield. That was a useful piece of information. It also informed VS and the Dark Apostle how they could win the leadership challenge even if they lost the next 2 duels. So long as they were strong enough, they could make up for the remaining shortcomings by sounding more decisive than the department head of the Phase Lord department. While the Dark Apostle was ready to conclude this satisfying duel, VS still had questions. If we ask you to remain aligned to Red Humanity and deploy in the front lines to fight directly against the alien Phase Lords, will you and your men be willing to obey orders? The fiery axe shifted her gaze between the Dark Apostle and Blinky several times. Their separate personality business was so weird that she did not know how to handle such a situation. Were they even the same person? She shrugged. Our duty is clear. No matter what we think, so long as you outrank us, your word is law. If you become the Polomarcos, no voice of authority can countermand your orders. We do not care about other red humans. We reject the authority of god pilots and star designers. Only the strongest among us can command our loyalty. I have instilled this rule in the heads of all of the flesh choppers. Those who disagree with this principle are not welcome within our ranks. You can rest assured that none of my subordinates will ever go rogue so long as I am in charge. VS was not sure how much stock he could put into her judgment, but she sounded confident enough, so he was willing to give her a chance. Very well. Our takeover is not yet complete, but we would like you to start on your first assignment. Please write a report on the internal situation of the Ascended Giants in your own words. We need to understand what we are dealing with, and your perspective may prove illuminating. I would like you to take special note of Ascended Giants who have shown leadership qualities and can be entrusted to lead independent units into battle. I shall do so. I look forward to turning in my report once you have won the challenge. Chapter 7188, An Alternate Proposition. Chapter 7188, An Alternate Proposition. 2 down 2 to go. VS and the Dark Apostle both had many reasons to feel happy. They had won 2 matches in a convincing, if not entirely respectable fashion. Though people could quibble about the means that the challenger employed to achieve his victories, the fact that he won it all could not be disputed. The Ascended Giants should definitely gain a better impression of their possible new leader. The Dark Apostle had decisively proven that his performance in the first duel was not a fluke. He had just shown them all that he was able to handle the most defense-oriented Ascended Giant without suffering too many setbacks. So far, the leadership candidate showed that he possessed the strength to keep up with the best of their kind. That was already a good sign, especially since they knew that the Dark Apostle was not supposed to be good at fighting in the first place. Few, if any, of the Ascended Giants bothered to think why a mech designer was able to fight so well with a spear. Perhaps they chalked it up to growing up among mech pilots or choosing to learn fighting skills ever since he became a phase lord. Whatever the case, the Ascended Giants cared a lot more about being represented by a leader who possessed the strength to suppress his own kind. It would also be nice if he happened to be a renowned innovator who developed good relations with the major powers of Red humanity. The Dark Apostle therefore presented a compelling package to these Ascended Giants. While he may sound a little too pre-erd humanity for their tastes, they could still tolerate his leadership as long as he sought to put their own race first. As the Dark Apostle returned to the recovery area, the doctors did not have to work as hard to treat his injuries. The fiery axe hadn't been able to last long enough to inflict deeper and more serious wounds. The shallow cuts and burns made by her fiery axe could easily be treated with giant-sized additions of proven human treatments. What was more important was for VS to replenish his energy and other reserves. He had exerted himself quite a bit during the last 2 matches, so he drank a standard cargo container's worth of diluted phase water and took a bite out of a giant-sized nutrient bar. Yes, the Red Collective already developed special nutrient bars and nutrient packs for human phase lords. They were surprisingly filling and appetizing. The Dark Apostle could somehow feel his belly at work. He had confidence that he could return to peak condition as soon as he was able to fully digest this nutrient supplement. Near the end of the recovery period, the Dark Apostle adorned his next set of equipment. Against an Ascended Giant who earned his fame for being good at throwing harpoons, it sounded prudent to enter the dueling ground with a heavy defensive loadout this time. The combination of a heavy oval shield that was able to cover the head and torso and a serviceable raiment that provided stronger protection at the front should be able to deal with the threat. Of course, neither VS nor the Dark Apostle thought the Divine Harpoon was that simple to counter. He wouldn't have been able to become the strategos of the faceless giant phalanx if that was the case. The Dark Apostle's exploding spear trick was already strong enough to become known as his signature move as a phase lord. This implied that the Divine Harpoon's throwing ability might be comparable in power. That introduced a completely different dynamic in the third fight. The Dark Apostle could not afford to start the next fight assuming that he would get an easy ride. Of course, just because the Dark Apostle currently enjoyed a lot of frontal protection did not mean his attack ability was weak. Just before the bots handed over the shortened spear, Blinky commanded them to pause. "What are you doing? Arming you with the Dark Fang seems inadequate to me. We still have the Dark Tooth left over from the previous duel. Sure, it has gotten banged up, but it still works. Mostly. Are you suggesting that we enter the dueling ground with 2 spears instead of 1? That will cut into our mass allowance. No, but we can still shave a bit of weight here and there. After witnessing the previous 2 duels, I have learned that it is better to stack lots of armor in places that need defending and much less protection in places that are less critical. Right now, there are armor sections that fall in between. In hindsight, I think it is better to slim them down as they do not offer worthwhile enough protection as strong enough attacks can always go through. Will that be enough? Probably not, but you don't need to bring along the complete Dark Tooth. It is a good thing that I designed it in a segmented configuration, so it will be easy for us to shorten it to a more compact size. Since the Dark Apostle spawned from VS True Body, he had a pretty good understanding of what the mech designer was thinking. You want to give me an extra throwing option. Since I did not throw the Dark Tooth in the end, I may as well do it in the next duel. This way I won't be forced to remain passive. Blinky nodded. Yes, but in order to make it all fit within our mass budget, I need to slim down both the Dark Tooth and the Dark Bulwark. Hold on for a moment. I need to tell these technicians to make a few last-minute modifications. Time was short, but VS had long noticed that the techs had access to excellent equipment. It took a bit of ingenuity and improvisation, but the techs successfully managed to shave off a few tons of armor here and there. Their workmanship was cruder than VS would have liked, but the demonized heavy raiment successfully became a little slimmer than before. This gave the Dark Apostle enough of a window to carry a second short spear. The dark tooth was no longer as long and far-reaching as before. After removing multiple shaft segments, it had become even shorter than the Dark Fang, which was supposed to be the only main weapon. However, it was still good enough to be thrown. It just wouldn't produce as big of an explosion as it could have due to its reduced mass and volume. This would give the Dark Apostle a second opportunity to throw an exploding spear at the Divine Harpoon. Soon enough, it was time to start the third duel. As the Dark Apostle and the Divine Harpoon met each other in person for the first time, they calmly took each other's measure. Unlike the Unshakable King and the Fiery Axe, the Divine Harpoon did not appear too remarkable on the surface. His raiment looked dull and lacked a powerful statement. It was as if he specifically commanded it to be as bland and devoid of any distinguishing marks. VS learned that this was one of the characteristics of the Faceless Giants. It imposed a high degree of uniformity in order to maximize teamwork and prevent enemies from identifying and targeting specific talents. If not for the fact that the other Phase Lord attached multiple harpoons on his back, it would have been impossible to distinguish him from the other Faceless Giants. Another aspect about the man that separated him from ordinary Ascended Giants was his unique aura or temperament. The Divine Harpoon looked and carried himself like a man who had lived through half of the Age of Mechs and would not be fazed by any surprises anymore. This was an extremely steady soldier and commander who had lived through so many events that he had lost his youthful vigor. With age came experience. The man formerly known as Harudi Molayne had a well-deserved reputation for being a steady hand that could be entrusted to do his job well. Although he no longer possessed the energy and spontaneity of his younger peers, such qualities were not always desirable. This made him the perfect leader for the Faceless Giants, a lower-quality phalanx that was larger and therefore filled with a greater quantity of powerful and unruly Ascended Giants. Only a leader as steady as the Divine Harpoon would be able to turn them into proper soldiers in a very short amount of time. VS and the Dark Apostle experienced firsthand the aura of an old commander who was able to command respect and obedience just by being in his presence. At this moment, it was clear that the Divine Harpoon was evaluating them both. Well met, Dark Apostle. What a concerning name you have chosen for yourself. Regardless, we abide by different rules now. No matter whether you wield the power of light or darkness, you are a qualified leader, as long as you are strong enough to stand up for our interests and responsible enough to care for your men. In the previous two duels, you have unquestionably proven the former. It is not strictly necessary for you to prove your martial prowess any further as far as I am concerned. What I am concerned about is that you have yet to prove the latter. Both Blinky and the Dark Apostle frowned. How do you propose to test us on whether we can be a responsible leader for the Ascended Giants? VS asked. The Divine Harpoon responded with a mild smile under his helmet. I have prepared a proposition for you. In my opinion, there is little value to be gained by fighting a third duel under the current rules. I would like to amend them and decide the outcome of the duel by holding a more limited competition. We should step away from each other and take turns throwing our weapons at each other. The Ascended Giant that has suffered the greatest physical injuries at the end of this exchange will concede without bothering to contest the duel any further than is necessary. What do you think? VS and the Dark Apostle reacted with surprise. This alternative was a much cleaner way to determine the victor of the third duel. While it was not safe for either side, the violence would be restricted, so the chance of suffering accidents should be low. Now that VS and the Dark Apostle were already halfway towards success, it became more crucial than ever to let the situation spin out of control. That is, a generous arrangement, strategos. I am not finished. The Divine Harpoon adopted a serious expression. I will only agree to compete against you this way if you make a concession. I want you to impart the secrets on how to make those exploding spears and how to prime them to explode when wielding them in battle. What? If you want us to fight against the native aliens, our race needs powerful weapons that they can use to defeat alien gods on a reliable basis. Short of equipping us all with superdimensional arms and armor, we can slay many enemies of both Red Humanity and the Ascended Giants if we have access to the same means as you have employed to turn the previous two duels around. Think of how impressive it would be if all 240 Faceless Giants throw their exploding spears at the same time. No greater Phase Lord should be able to withstand the mass detonations. That would be an impressive sight, VS admitted. However, was it truly wise to share one of his latest trump cards with the Phase Lord department? Both VS and the Dark Apostle immediately felt conflicted. On the one hand, there was no way they would voluntarily agree to share their trump card to the Phase Lord department. This was especially when the probability of leaks was high. It shouldn't take too long for the Red Collective and maybe even the Red Cabal to master the secrets of throwing spears that could explode with the power of tactical weapons of mass destruction. Chapter 7189. An Accidental Discovery. Chapter 7189. An Accidental Discovery. What the divine harpoon asked from him was a bit much. It was like asking the oscillating fist to hand over the secret to how he was able to shake internal organs apart whenever he punched another phase lord. Demanding to learn another person's trade secrets was taboo in both the mech industry and many other fields. Yet, it was undeniable that letting the Ascended Giants master and make extensive use of the sacrificial spear-throwing method would undoubtedly benefit them a lot. This was a special means for phase lords to inflict massive damage by throwing the cultivation equivalent of an explosive munition. While VS could argue that the Ascended Giants could attain similar effects by carrying missile launchers into battle, the damage potential of most missiles at this scale would not be able to match the potency of a good quality sacrificial spear. Your request is problematic. VS answered through Blinky as the silence dragged on for a bit. You should be aware that the method to make this happen is anything but unusual. One of its traits is that it is hard to detect any object that is built to produce a powerful blast. If our secret method gets leaked, not only will random people be able to throw initially unassuming stuff around that can breach the hull of starships or cause a space station to rupture from the inside. The divine harpoon acknowledged the potential for damage that this action could precipitate. The fact that you are concerned about such matters is proof that you care to a certain extent. What I am asking for you is indeed a serious demand, but that is the best way for us to ascertain whether you are sincere about assuming stewardship over the Ascended Giants. You should understand that sharing your remarkable method of throwing exploding spears can do much more good if you share it to all Ascended Giants. We will not force you to do so, but choosing to keep it to yourself will send a different message to the men and women you hope to lead. That did not sound good. It became clear to VS that the shrewd strategos of the Faceless Giants intended to put the challenger on the spot. Many Ascended Giants had indeed taken a liking for his 35 AP spear-throwing method. It might not be worth that much in absolute terms, but it was practically perfect for the Ascended Giants. They were able to reach more and more exaggerated proportions as they made more attainments in phase lord body cultivation. This would allow them to wield increasingly larger and more destructive spears. Even if they were made out of cheaper alloys, in order to save on costs, the spear could still produce a powerful enough explosion as long as its volume was large enough. The potency of the sacrificial spear-throwing method would only grow higher in the future. Lesser phase lords were only able to scale up so much. Great phase lords reached much more exaggerated proportions. They were already able to approach the size of small to medium-sized moons. When they were large enough to generate their own gravity wells, what would happen if they launched massive sacrificial spears at a planet? The globe would definitely suffer an extinction event. Of course, the cost and effort needed to construct even a single massive spear was prohibitive. VS doubted that there was any production facility in the Red Ocean that could fully mass-produce such an insane product. He threw aside such unrealistic notions. There was no need to entertain such ridiculous thoughts to realize the greater value of the sacrificial spear-throwing method. What do you think? VS privately asked his alter ego. Do it, the Dark Apostle straightforwardly said. I don't like to share my toys, but if I have to choose between keeping the sacrificial spear-throwing method to myself and winning over the Ascended Giants, I would choose the latter every time. There is no comparison between the two. So what if others will be able to throw exploding spears? Hyper-technology and etechnology is never exclusive to us. From the moment we showed off what was possible, the Red Cabal and all of the other powers have probably started their own research groups dedicated towards replicating what we have done. Sacrificial spears aren't as difficult to replicate as living mechs, so they will succeed sooner or later. He made a good point. VS also took into account that since the mech designer system was able to provide a copy of the sacrificial spear-throwing method, other copies may be available elsewhere. VS was not stupid enough to believe that he obtained the only copy. Very well. Since this is the case, I will allow you to make the trade. It is a pity to give up exclusivity on this method so soon, but it may be for the best. Just think of how much more powerful the Ascended Giants will be once they all carry around the same exploding spears. This will be an expensive arms program, but the results will speak for themselves. The other Ascended Giants shouldn't be able to produce explosions as powerful as the one that trounced the unshakable king. The spear that VS sacrificed was not only comprised of lots of high-grade fire hypers and other expensive materials, but had also turned into a dharm. There was no feasible way for VS to hand over such dharms to his Ascended Giants en masse. Fortunately, the scale of these weapons were fairly small. Most of the Ascended Giants had not made that much progress in their body cultivation, but that would change over time. Once they became as tall as biological juggernauts, any spear they threw should be able to strip the spatial barriers of most lesser phase lords upon impact. Not that this would be strictly necessary. VS already formulated plans to equip the Ascended Giants with superdimensional arms. This was a massive expenditure that the Larkinson clan would have to cover, but the gains should be more than satisfactory. A troop of Ascended Giants in full superdimensional gear should be able to defeat most native alien fleets, even the ones led by greater phase lords. The Dark Apostle eventually voiced his response to the divine harpoon. I accept your proposition, but only if I assume leadership over the oscillating fist. I am confident in my ability to win this leadership challenge, but I will not tolerate any scams. I think that the rest of red humanity will not rest easily if you have gained the capacity to throw around these dangerous spears unless you answer to a man they can trust like myself. Do we have an understanding? The divine harpoon remained still for a moment before nodding. Yes, I would like to thank you in advance for making this contribution. The ascending giants are too new and we have yet to fully flesh out our own unique martial traditions. Your contribution will accelerate this development and define our approach towards combat in the years to come. The mood between the two had eased. Neither VS nor the Dark Apostle sensed any hostility from the divine harpoon. From the moment they struck the deal, the strategos of the faceless giants had effectively defected to his side. That meant that this was the point where VS and the Dark Apostle had conquered the leaders of all three phalanxes of the ascended giants. In other words, the Phase Lord department was already in their pocket. Of course, the ritual still had to run its course. The leadership challenge could not be aborted ahead of time unless VS and the Dark Apostle abandoned their attempt. The two human Phase Lords began to back off from each other. They moved far away enough so that both of them still remained in comfortable throwing distance while still giving each other enough time to make split-second reactions after one of them threw their arms. Let me go first, as I have brought more throwing weapons than you, the divine harpoon said as he retrieved one of his bone-white harpoons from his back. Do you know that my harpoons are made of fortified phase whale bones? I already suspected that given their white exterior. To be honest, I could have chosen to commission harpoons that are made out of stronger non-organic alloys, the stratego said as he slowly began to adopt a thrower's stance. Do you know why I favor these bones, even if they are arguably inferior in toughness, flexibility, and other parameters? Neither VS nor the Dark Apostle could come up with a good explanation. No! The divine harpoon finally displayed the first inkling of passion. Well, you are in for a treat because this is the first time I have taken the initiative to reveal this discovery. Since you have generously decided to share your exploding spear method, I shall make my own contribution. I originally commissioned these harpoons because I thought it is only fitting to hunt down phase whales with their own bones. It is only after I have practiced with them day and night that I have made an accidental discovery. If you have become so familiar with a weapon made out of the bones of a phase whale, you can form a deeper connection to it, if only briefly at first. That sounded interesting. You may be thinking why this is important. The more I have been able to connect with a phase whale bone harpoon, the more I am able to treat it as an extension of myself. Literally. Do you understand what this means? The Dark Apostle did not immediately get it, but VS was different. Are you claiming that you can apply spatial abilities to it that normally limit themselves to affecting your true body? Yes, that is exactly right. The divine harpoon smiled. Think of the implications. Phase water organs that grant us the power to increase our mass and density, allow us to warp or teleport elsewhere, make us tougher, and generate a warp bubble around us can all be applied to my harpoons so long as I am able to align with them, if I may use my own terminology. In the past few months, I have quietly worked to develop and master the exploitation of this new phenomenon. While I do not think I have completed my work, I have made enough progress to demonstrate the power of phase whale bone alignment technique in front of a wider audience for the first time. Great. That meant that the Dark Apostle would also be the first Phase Lord to enjoy the privilege of serving as the target dummy for this demonstration. Sure enough, the Divine Harpoon would not let VS and the Dark Apostle take over the Phase Lord department so easily. At least this spectacle gave him the excuse to explain his new technique to the challenger beforehand. It would have been a lot less pleasant to be subjected to his special attack without knowing anything in advance. The Dark Apostle already shifted into a defensive stance. He took the Divine Harpoon's impending attack extremely seriously, especially given what he heard. VS. He said over his private connection with the original occupant of his true body. I know. If these thrown harpoons threaten to pierce through all of your defenses and impale our true body, I will help you channel our Warclaw energy to prevent them from going any further. This might not be as effective as it sounded. VS lacked practice in manipulating Warclaw energy, and he had a feeling that it was not supposed to be used this way. At the very least, he would have to expend a significant amount of Warclaw energy to produce a positive result. It shouldn't be necessary to resort to this emergency measure right away. The Dark Apostle could rely on multiple layers of defense. His spatial barrier was fully active, and so was the relatively weak but serviceable Azure energy shield produced by his raiment. If these energy defenses were not enough to block an incoming harpoon, then the unimaginably named Dark Shield and Dark Bulwark should be able to withstand the remaining force. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu Chapter 7190. The Power of a Throw. Chapter 7190. The Power of a Throw. VS had never thought that phase whale bones possessed such potential. It was amazing when he thought about it. Did the phenomenon described by the divine harpoon apply exclusively to phase whale bones? What about the bones of phase lords? Could they also be used to make weapons that could be turned into extensions of the wielder's true body? He had a huge amount of technical questions, but this was not the time to engage in an academic exchange. The third duel had commenced. Though VS and the divine harpoon had just forged an agreement to limit this fight to a throwing contest, that did not necessarily mean it was safe. VS and the Dark Apostle had no references to the new technique that the divine harpoon was about to demonstrate. Could be weak, could be powerful, could fall somewhere in between. The uncertainty about this new phenomenon gnawed at VS. Did the Dark Apostle enjoy enough protection to withstand at least 3 harpoon impacts? If the divine harpoon simply tossed them over like normal, then VS did not have much concern. The spatial barrier and all of the physical armor were no joke. They could seriously resist enough attacks to stall a troop of mechs as well as a warship. However, they were not that strong against enemies that got close enough to use a space suppressor of transphasic weapons with a high content of phase water. Each of the harpoons were inherently made out of bones that integrated phase water from the very beginning. Subsequent processing added in reinforcements and supplements that strengthened it even further and added hypermaterials to make them more remarkable. Now the divine harpoon held one such weapon in his arm. A trail of chains made out of processed phase whale bones connected to the back of his raiment. This was the chain that the divine harpoon might use to prevent the escape of an enemy he successfully managed to spear. Right now it wasn't necessary for the divine harpoon to hunt his enemy down, so he readily detached the chain, so that the harpoon turned into a strangely shaped javelin. Unlike VS, the R&D team that worked for the other Ascended Giant did not decide to integrate an Audible mechanism into the bone harpoon. The divine harpoon preferred to throw his weapons in the most classical and primitive fashion. He held the harpoon just behind a high-friction band that was wrapped around the center of the shaft. He began to assume his stance. His throwing posture was impeccable. He looked like the very model of an armored athlete as he bent his body back in an exaggerated fashion that spoke of bone surgery and augmentation. He began to call upon the power of his phase water organs one by one. At the same time he communed with his harpoon so that he was able to align it to him or the other way around. VS was not sure what was going on. He needed to gain access to the other man's experimental logs and research data to be absolutely certain. Still, VS and the Dark Apostle were easily able to sense how the fabric of space twisted and contorted itself to amplify the Dark Harpoon's mass strength and other properties. His weapon also enjoyed the same benefits, though some of the weirder effects only partially stick to the bone armament. The more the divine harpoon gathered his strength, the more imposing he became. He did not possess a large collection of phase water organs, but each of them had been chosen to help him withstand punishment while also allowing him to throw incredibly powerful spears. Even without his latest trick, he had already earned a reputation for being strong and unpleasant to duel against. After all, few phase lords were in a mood to challenge a martial god who was able to spear your body from a distance. Ripped formed in the space around the divine harpoon. Those ripples also emanated from the harpoon. It was as if the weapon had come to life for a brief moment. VS tried his best to rely on his true body spatial senses, as well as the sensors and scanners of the Dark Bulwark, to make sense of all of the effects. The standard effects were easy to identify. The harpoon did not change in size but became a lot denser. Its structure became reinforced. It gained a warp bubble that allowed it to soar through space faster. It also gained greater resistance against hostile spatial effects. However, that was not the extent of the enhancements. There were anomalous data readings that VS couldn't figure out because it overlapped with readings from other effects. The tip of the harpoon shone in a menacing light. The space directly around the spear started to shake at a higher frequency. The hypermaterials integrated into the harpoon absorbed more E-energy radiation. When the divine harpoon had completed his preparations, he helpfully issued a warning to his opponent. "Get ready. I am about to launch my first harpoon." The Dark Apostle nodded in acknowledgement and braced himself for the impact that was about to come. Demonic possession spearmanship did not teach its practitioners how to build a physical shield that could reinforce its defensive power by channeling darkness energy. Neither did it impart any techniques on how the wielder could actively strengthen this capability to the limit. However, VS was a mech designer who had become accustomed to adapting strange and alien solutions to his works. He resorted to recycling common solutions, filling in the gaps, taking inspiration from other fields, and making up for the remaining with pure guesswork. The dark shield therefore began to harmonize with the darkness energy under the careful direction of VS and the Dark Apostle. Not all of it proceeded smoothly. Despite the abundance of darkness energy siphoned from the environment as well as the Blinkyverse, much of it spilled past or went to waste as the novel implementation of hypertechnology remained crude. The main reason why it was not a bigger waste of energy was because the dark shield's conversion into a dharm solved some of its flaws. With the active intervention of a minor demon that desperately wanted to live, the dharm finally managed to produce an additional surface layer made of condensed darkness. The Dark Apostle was ready to meet the incoming attack. Both human phase lords remained still for a moment. Then the divine harpoon wound himself backwards a little bit further before instantly lunging forward, as if to hurl the most important projectile in his life. The leader of the faceless giants held nothing back as he anchored his foot onto the fabric of space, and used it as the base to add more force and velocity to each limb connecting to the harpoon. It was like watching a masterwork biomechanical construct in motion. The divine harpoon executed a close-to-perfect throw by imparting his projectile with as much kinetic energy as he could squeeze out of his throwing form. This near-perfect harpoon throw translated into a monstrously powerful attack when thrown by a phase lord. The projectile instantly cuts through space with even greater force and momentum than the Dark Apostle's prior spear throws. Although the harpoon lacked the blessing of a sacrificial spear, the augmentations imparted through the phase whale bone alignment technique turned it into a different kind of deadly polearm. Even with the benefit of plenty of forewarning, the Dark Apostle still experienced a spike of fear and panic as this harpoon soared straight in his direction. Fortunately, the harpoon traveled way too quickly for him to succumb to his weaknesses. Before he could even register the fact that an incredibly sharp and powerful harpoon was looking to impale him, it had already arrived and smashed through this energy defenses by relying on a combination of brute force and spatial shenanigans. It was as if a needle shattered a mirror. 2 mirrors, even. The divine harpoon had no need to get close, and use his space suppressor to weaken the Dark Apostle's energy defenses, because his harpoon already possessed the power to pierce through such protection. VS could not believe how easily the empowered harpoon had managed to breach both layers of defense. The only consolation was that they had put up a good amount of resistance. The harpoon already expended much of its kinetic energy as well as other mixed energies. By the time the tip of the harpoon closed in on the dark shield, the cloying layer of darkness immediately weakened and sapped its energies further. The tip of the harpoon eventually went on to dig a shallow groove onto its surface. Even this was a remarkable result given how tough the transphasic hypershield had become after its conversion into a dharm. Everyone reacted with shock at this result. Even his own faceless giants had no clue how extensively their own strategos managed to improve his harpoon throwing technique. It made a certain amount of sense for the Dark Apostle's explosive spears to be able to produce such violent explosions. V's application of hypertechnology and etechnology was grounded in familiar principles that just happened to be utilized in different ways. What the divine harpoon managed to do was more impressive. He had discovered and weaponized a familiar class of organic materials. He infused them with strength and power that was normally reserved for the bones of his own true body. If he chose to divulge his theories and his experimental logs to the rest of the Phase Lord department, then he would make a massive contribution to Red humanity. This discovery could change the value of human Phase Lords on the battlefield. Although it sounded as if this method was not applicable to mechs, it was already amazing enough if all human Phase Lords harnessed this new capability. What was even better was that there was a possibility it could be combined with the sacrificial spear throwing method. Though VS knew that it would not be easy to convert phase whale bones into a hypermaterial that could absorb an excess amount of E-energy, VS saw no reason why it couldn't be done. This was merely a difficult engineering problem rather than trying to realize a miracle. Everyone's evaluation of the divine harpoon improved. This took place even when it became clear that his extraordinary technique had taken a lot out of the ascended giant. He clearly looked a little more fatigued than before. This made it clear that he specialized in throwing harpoons. He probably went as far as sacrificing opportunities to strengthen his close-quarters combat capabilities in order to be of greater use to his phalanx. VS belatedly realized that the divine harpoon managed to hoodwink him and his alter ego. What a devious old man. The altered dueling terms favored the divine harpoon a lot more than VS thought. The man was able to draw upon his advantages without any concern that VS would run up and exploit his extensive period of vulnerability after making a large exertion. The Dark Apostle grinned. Impressive. My turn now. Figures. Though VS felt concerned about entering a contest that favored his opponent a lot more, the disparity between the two sides was not completely uneven. VS felt grateful that he made a suggestion to being along a shortened version of the Dark Tooth. At this moment, the Dark Apostle retrieved the aforementioned weapon from his back. The spear still bore the scars of the previous duel, but VS personally confirmed it was sound enough to pull off the sacrificial spear throwing method. Be careful, old man. Just as you did not hold back, I will not hold back much either. You can rest assured that I will not draw upon my Warclaw energy to best your old butt. I will not make use of it because I am being stingy, but because I do not think I need to rely on it to win this throwing contest. 2 exploding spears are enough. Brave words, young giant. I hope you can back up your confidence with your mediocre throwing technique. Mediocre? What the hell? Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 71-91. Dark Orb. The Dark Apostle prepared his own weapon throw. He held the dark tooth in an increasingly familiar grip and gazed at the divine harpoon bracing for a powerful attack. The Strategos carried his own physical shield, though it did not offer as much protection as the dark shield due to the limitations of his mass allowance. Those harpoons of his weighed him down considerably. The scientists and engineers working for the Phase Lord Department also possessed a lot of limitations. They lost access to the tech libraries and internal warehouses of the Red Collective and other related organizations. They had to do their best with limited means. Even so, the divine harpoon should not be weak. He possessed a good selection of phase water organs, many of which fortified his strength and increased his toughness. Not every Phase Lord chose to prioritize speed over durability like the fiery axe. The divine harpoon should be able to withstand a few powerful blows, or else he could not call himself a self-respecting ascended giant. In any case, the Dark Apostle held his weapon at the unfolded mechanism at the butt of the shaft in preparation for his throwing action. Though he appeared serious, his emotions remained unbalanced due to the remark he just heard. The divine harpoon called his spear-throwing skills mediocre. That shouldn't be possible. Even if the Enlightenment fruit did not grant total mastery, he became quite proud by how good he had become at throwing spears. VS thought his alter ego was being ridiculous. Why the hell are you taking pride in accomplishments that you haven't even earned? You did not spend years or decades mastering the art of throwing stuff like the divine harpoon. You did not put in close to the amount of time that other warriors have dedicated to their fighting skills. You are nothing without the special gifts that I have earned through my own hard labor. Don't forget how inept you fought when you first emerged. The mechs of our clan easily spanked you into submission. I have made sure that you will not go down easily next time. The human Phase Lord's expression soured. You could have allowed me to keep this fantasy alive. I admit that we have gained none of our fighting skills the old-fashioned way, but it is how we make use of them in practice that matters. I am displeased that the divine harpoon thinks so little of my throwing form. Look on the bright side, buddy. VS lightheartedly said. There is still a lot more room for improvement. The skills you have gained are generic and do not take our personal conditions into account. The best techniques are often the ones that fit our circumstances the most. We have yet to do any of that. This may be the heart of the divine harpoon's critique. Have you ever considered that your throwing form is flawed because it is so standard? This technique was not especially devised for us. This means that if we truly want to master it, we must change it to suit our own conditions. He may have hit the nail on the head. The Dark Apostle looked more understanding. It would have been helpful if his adversary had been clearer in his advice. It would have spared him from a lot of procrastination. The Ascended Giant eventually chose to push this matter aside. We need to finish this duel first. Assist me in my next throw. The Dark Apostle reared back in a similar manner to the divine harpoon. He utilized his general spatial abilities to anchor his foot to the local space and began to execute the special technique that primed the dark tooth to explode. VS was slightly worried that glitches might occur due to any number of reasons, from the damage sustained by the weapon in the previous battle to the imperfections of trying to translate a fire technique into a darkness technique, but none of his fears came true. The dark tooth was beginning to prime for a powerful explosion in a similar manner as before. Although darkness energy was not the best kind of energy to produce the most violent possible explosions, it at least possessed the capacity to do so in its own way. Predictably, the minor demon locked inside the weapon attempted to rebel against his impending doom. Of course, there was no way a minor demon could resist the solid hold that Blinky had over the unwilling artifact spirit. The spear began to accrue a large amount of darkness energy, though it was less than in the previous duel. Cutting down the length of the staff had made it lighter but also less potent. That was the trade-off that VS and the Dark Apostle made when they adopted their current loadout. Despite the smaller size, both VS and his other personality hoped that it was amply powerful enough to breach the spatial barrier and any other energy defenses that the divine harpoon had at his disposal. The initial explosion wasn't necessarily meant to do anything further, though extra damage always helped. As the Dark Apostle channeled his determination to break the divine harpoon's defenses and composure, then he would definitely derive a sense of fulfillment. When both he and his companion spirit felt that they had charged their sacrificial spear to the limit, a short pause ensued. The Dark Zephyr's dark and miasma-filled eyes stared directly at his target. His pride had taken a hit, so he became determined to earn it back. Let us see whether your defenses can keep up with your throwing prowess. Have a taste of my sacrificial spear. The urge to prove himself and prove his superiority drove the Dark Apostle to hurl his disposable weapon forward with great force, speed, and accuracy. A black streak instantly soared from one human phase lord to another. It only took a very short amount of time before the dark tooth collided against the divine harpoon's spatial barrier before exploding. Everyone who observed the battle suddenly felt their heart racing as they perceived a vague and illusionary threat in the field. This was a threat that was so powerful and so frightening that practically any observer became afflicted by the instinctive desire to flee or attack. What is this? No other attack has ever made me feel this way. For just a short interval of time, a black orb of darkness briefly engulfed the ascended giant, causing many people to fear the exploding pair had done its job a little too well. It was only after much of the power of the explosion receded that it became clear that the divine harpoon managed to resist the attack with his formidable defenses. He clearly looked worse off than before, though. His spatial barrier and azure energy shield had failed to withstand the blows, just as many people predicted. The shortened spear still possessed enough punch to accomplish at least this much. What most people wanted to know was whether the divine harpoon suffered any real damage, and it definitely looked as if he did. His raiment remained intact for the most part. The initial explosion had failed to breach the divine harpoon's raiment, but it did leave a huge amount of dark Miami behind. This was the lingering corruptive substance that could weaken or corrode nearly anything when given enough time to do its work in peace. The divine harpoon was anything but willing to let the dark miasma do its part. He shook his body and began to use his armored limbs to rub off the corruption as best as possible. His methods may be crude, but they were working. The dark miasma had yet to sink too deep into the divine harpoon's raiment. It was doing its best to eat through the armor layers, but the materials proved too thick and resistant to succumb so quickly. The darkness eventually faded. The man's raiment still bore the scars and stains of the ominous force that attempted to compromise his raiment. It looked a lot uglier and less functional than before. Interesting. The divine harpoon uttered. The power you command is certainly frightening. If I was a lesser ascended giant, I would have felt more disturbed by the illusions brought about by these dark energies. The direct power of your explosion is not as strong as you have shown the first time. Is it because of the smaller size of the spear and moving away from using fire energy? The man was quite astute. Yes, the Dark Apostle plainly admitted. The size of the spear determines how much mass you can convert into explosive stuff. The method was originally designed to work with fire energy, but we managed to make it work with darkness energy with a lot of improvisation. This is the first time we have tried it out, to be honest, and I am glad that the explosion is still powerful enough to strip your defenses. If we had more time, we could have improved our techniques a lot more. I have no doubt you can do so, but that is a matter for the future. It is my turn again. The divine harpoon did not let his damaged raiment affect his purpose. He calmly retrieved his second harpoon from his back and made an identical stance as before. As he began to align himself with the phase whale bone material that served as the core of his harpoon, he once again managed to fool reality into treating it as one of his limbs. The harpoon soon behaved as if it was a living extension of the ascended giant's body. It gained multiple different augmentations that turned the weapon from a serious threat into a bane to all phase leaders. VS and the Dark Apostle made their own preparations. The Dark Shield and the Dark Bulwark received a powerful infusion of darkness energy, as both of them tried their best to raise their defenses as much as possible. The two felt a lot more naked now that their spatial barrier and azure energy shield were down. There was no feasible way to restore them in a short amount of time, so they could only count on their physical defenses for the time being. Get ready. Bring it on, old man. The divine harpoon launched his weapon forward with great power and technique. Before everyone could properly track the harpoon, it slammed into the dark shield as if it teleported across the entire stretch. The heavy and powerful harpoon pierced through the dark miasma that covered the surface layer and moved far too quickly to let the corrupting energies weaken its structure. Armor layer after armor layer succumbed to the tip that had been especially designed to not only penetrate tough materials but also hook into place so that it could be used as an anchor to restrain the target in question. Although VS and the Dark Apostle did not have to worry about the latter, they still had to defend themselves against the former, as the Dark Shield gained an expanding hole as the kinetic energy of the harpoon proved too much for the Darm. The harpoon eventually went on to strike the frontal armor of the Dark Bulwark, but by then it had lost enough power and momentum for the heavy raiment to do a proper job. After punching through multiple layers, the harpoon finally lost all of its momentum and ended up stuck halfway through, piercing through the chest armor. Though the harpoon ultimately failed to draw blood, the Dark Apostle still shivered for a moment as he imagined that it could have gone a lot worse. He looked at the condition of the Dark Shield. Its damage was extensive. The initial impact subjected it to a lot of force, causing it to gain a very sizable hole that could easily let another harpoon pass without encountering any material resistance. That is a problem, VS uttered. Chapter 7192. The Second Explosion. Both ascended giants only had one projectile left each. The sacrificial spears thrown by the Dark Apostle were undoubtedly more powerful, but he only brought two of them to this duel. The divine harpoon originally carried 3 harpoons into the field, of which 2 had already done a good job of stripping his adversary of his defenses. Both human phase lords knew that they had reached the critical junction. Given how much the earlier harpoon had messed up, the Dark Shield VS had little confidence that it could provide adequate protection against the next throw. The divine harpoon's throwing capabilities were too good. VS had no doubt that the strategos of the faceless giants would be able to thread the needle and sink a harpoon straight through the fairly large gap in the damaged arm. That meant that the harpoon would only have to overcome the defenses of the dark bulwark before it could sink its anchor-like tip into the flesh of his true body. The damage would be extensive. The harpoon may even sink deep enough to pierce through one of his phase water organs. Although VS was secretly prepared to mobilize much of his remaining Warclaw energy to hinder the passage of the incoming harpoon, he needed to react in time to catch the attack. This was a serious challenge by itself. Another issue was that VS had a strong feeling he needed to save all of the Warclaw energy that he had left for the 4th and final duel. The shadow of the oscillating fist loomed large over the entire leadership challenge. VS and the Dark Apostle deliberately placed him last when they gained the power to choose the order of challenges. Even if they managed to win the current duel and formally win the leadership challenge, that was only the case if both sides abided by the terms of the contract. What if the oscillating fist refused to abide by this agreement? Words on virtual documents had no power to restrain the most powerful ascended giant alive. It was quite stressful to deal with such powerhouses. Just like Star Designer's human phase lords had no obligation to follow their oaths and stick to their promises. They could be as duplicitous as they wanted. If the oscillating fist had no intention of giving up the phase lord department, then he could potentially tear everything apart during the 4th duel. VS thought about avoiding this confrontation. The Dark Apostle had an excuse to do so if he won 3 duels in a row. Yet that would probably not sit well with the alternate personality. All of the Ascended Giants also looked forward to a meeting between their 2 leaders. They needed to know how the 2 measured up against each other. To avoid this confrontation was an obvious sign of cowardice. That would definitely cause the more stubborn and skeptical Ascended Giants to lose confidence in V's leadership. This would make them much more prone to go rogue and defect to the Red Cabal. We need to finish this with your next throw. VS conveyed to his other personality. We cannot go into the next duel with a heavy injury or a total depletion of all of our Warclaw energy. If we want to win the hearts and minds of the Ascended Giants, we don't necessarily need to beat the oscillating fist, but we should at least make him hurt. The Dark Apostle nodded even as he retrieved the Dark Fong from his back. The spear happened to be longer than the last one, which meant that it should be able to produce a larger explosion. The good news was that the Divine Harpoon did not put a heavy emphasis on defense, which meant that the next sacrificial spear throw should be able to inflict serious damage. As long as the next sacrificial spear throw inflicted enough damage to cripple him enough to impair his ability to retaliate, then that would satisfy VS and the Dark Apostle's win condition. I think we need to put extra power into our next attack. Do you have any last-minute tricks or ideas that can put the Divine Harpoon out of action? Blinky shook his head. Not really. Aside from tapping into our reserves of Warclaw energy, all of the other ideas entail borrowing strength from external sources. The rule that prohibits us from drawing upon the power of our design spirits and so on is a serious impediment. If you can give me more time, I can optimize the translation of the sacrificial spear throwing method in the use of darkness energy. The current implementation is incredibly crude at the moment. A spear made of fire hyper-energy would have produced a bigger explosion, but VS and the Dark Apostle did not possess a particularly strong affinity with this element. In the long run, it was better if they focused on exploiting the attributes that they were most familiar with, namely metal, life, and darkness. As the 2 of them began to charge the spear with darkness energy, they put all of their hopes in their next weapon throw. The result of this move would determine whether he could take over the Ascended Giants smoothly or with difficulty. The Dark Apostle would very much like it if his new subordinates did not pine over their old leader. This was why he suddenly decided to burn a little phase water. What are you doing? I am doing what is necessary to end this duel. We can make up for this loss if we swallow a container's worth of diluted phase water right afterwards. Burning all of that phase water caused his phase water concentration to decrease, but the power-up they received was substantial. When the Dark Apostle finally tossed the dark and ominous spear, he estimated that he was able to put at least 20% more force behind his throw. The Dark Fong instantly soared forward and created a black streak above the surface of Jotunheim that directly struck the Divine Harpoon. At the last second, the strategos instinctively became alarmed by the force of this attack and roared as he rapidly burned his own phase water in order to amplify his defenses. The Dark Fong ultimately punched into his chest armor, penetrating through all of the layers before penetrating the surface of his chest. It then proceeded to explode, engulfing the Divine Harpoon in another massive black orb. The power of darkness radiated from the orb like a black sun. It persisted for a few long seconds before dispersing through strands of darkness. Everyone carefully studied the recipient's condition. Is he alive? He is, but he is struggling to repel the darkness. The divine harpoon no longer looked as valiant and strong as before. The entire front side of his raiment had blown apart while the rear had become contaminated with dark miasma. What was worse was that the dark miasma also spread to the front of his exposed head and front torso. Phase water-reinforced flesh became increasingly more contaminated. The affected flesh began to weaken and rebel against the rest of the true body. As serious as his current condition may appear, the divine harpoon had weathered the initial blast pretty well. He still remained conscious and was working hard to repel the darkness energy that was clinging to him like a sick disease. His companion spirit was doing its best to get rid of the darkness energy, but its abilities and elemental affinities were not that suited for the task. The divine harpoon lacked control over a convenient element that could easily scour away the darkness like the fiery axe. Almost a minute passed by as he gradually managed to snuff out all of the dark miasma. That had taken way too long. If the Dark Apostle was not restricted by the rules, he could have easily exploited his opponent's condition and landed a killing blow. The divine harpoon's raiment was pretty much ruined, so he tore away the remaining chunks. The leader of the faceless giants looked truly bedraggled this time. His grayed and blackened flesh still bore the lingering corruption brought about by darkness energy contamination. Though much of the damage to his body was concentrated onto his upper torso, his head and his arms had also become affected to a lesser degree. Nobody could determine whether he was still in a good enough condition to throw his last harpoon. The divine harpoon remained still for over a minute before his body finally slumped. I concede. I am no longer in a condition to throw my third harpoon. You have proven your strength and your willingness to assume responsibility over the ascended giants. As far as I am concerned, you are better qualified to become our Polemarchos than the oscillating fist. The Dark Apostle loosened the tension from his body. It was done. According to the agreement, he had won 3 out of 4 duels, which meant that his takeover was technically a done deal. Even if the oscillating fist denied that the Dark Apostle won the leadership challenge, he would definitely make a lot of ascended giants upset if he acted dishonorably. The reign of a tyrant was never stable. The oscillating fist would definitely experience a lot of problems in trying to keep the Phase Lord department under his control if he invalidated the Dark Apostle's successes. In other words, the chances were great that VS and the Dark Apostle would be able to take over the Phase Lord department before the end of the day. The Dark Apostle smiled even as his body and phase water organs started to ache from burning phase water. He threw a grateful look towards the divine harpoon. Nobody knew for certain whether the strategos spoke the truth about his condition or whether he deliberately stepped down when he still had a bit of fight left inside his battered true body. If the latter was the case, then the divine harpoon picked a good moment to back off. Nobody could truly fault him for conceding the duel when he looked so horrible at the moment. Even those who suspected foul play could not provide any proof that the strategos acted dishonorably. The 2 human phase lords nodded to each other once before leaving the dueling ground. As the Dark Apostle returned to his recovery base, he was greeted with applause and cheers from all of the collies. The victorious phase lord smiled but made his way over to the diluted phase water tanks before graping a hose and placing it in his mouth. Pressurized liquid began to spurt from the hose and enter straight into his stomach. The phase water should soon bring the phase water concentration in his bloodstream back to the previous level. It was only then that the Dark Apostle relaxed and basked in his success. Eliza Mo Ragadon floated up to the human phase lord's gigantic head. She looked particularly excited. Good work, sir. You have won 3 duels, which means that the Phase Lord department is yours. This will change everything. If you are still willing to let me serve as your chief of staff, I can immediately begin to coordinate with the staff of your new department in order to make your transition into your new position as problem-free as possible. There are many issues that need to be addressed due to the secret crisis, but not all matters require your personal attention. I can work to cut down all of the minor issues so that you can concentrate on the big picture. Blinky looked down at the ambitious chief of staff and narrowed his eyes in suspicion. Although Eliza Mo Ragadon had pledged her loyalty to VS, she was still a collie, so she also had the best interests of the RC at heart. Keeping her as his administrative troubleshooter within the Phase Lord department meant that she, along with many other collies, would be able to push through their own decisions. Not all of those decisions might align with his own interests. Perhaps it may be better to replace her with a Larkinson, or at least bring in a few staffers from the clan to ensure the Phase Lord department remembered who was in charge. We can discuss the details on how to reform the Phase Lord department at a later time. We still have one more duel to go. The Ascended Giants have been looking forward to witnessing the first meeting between us and the Oscillating Fist. Anything could happen, so do not put your guard down. Eliza faltered. Are you expecting problems? We don't know, the Dark Apostle said. And that scares us. Let us hope for the best but prepare for the worst. We know far too little about how the Oscillating Fist will react. Is he truly ready to hand over leadership of the Ascended Giants as he is obligated to according to the terms of the leadership challenge? If I was in his place, I would not give up so easily. Then let us hope that he has more honor and integrity than you. VS softly said. Chapter 7193. The Oscillating Variable. If there was one undeniable fact, it was that the shadow of the oscillating fist loomed tall over the entire leadership challenge. The RC negotiating team had done an excellent job of shaping the leadership challenge in a way that gave the Dark Apostle an option to take over the Phase Lord department without needing to confront its true leader. This was a masterstroke in negotiation. Perhaps the Ascended Giants themselves had not truly recognized the implications of these terms. Well, VS thought it was more likely that the Ascended Giants underestimated the challenger. They initially thought of him as a mech designer who possessed no real fighting skills. Well, they had certainly been proven wrong this time. The Oscillating Fist definitely shouldn't have been able to foresee how all three of his strategos eventually rolled over the challenger. This should have thrown him off balance, but this also made him even more unpredictable. How would he react? Would he accept the results? Would he try to fight back in order to retrieve the Phase Lord department back in his possession? All of these questions and more lingered in the minds of the Collies and even the Ascended Giants. After the initial celebrations subsided, the Collies all grew serious as they awaited the start of the fourth and final duel. Multiple think tanks ran through the data and came up with many different theories. The Red Collective had come closer than ever to regaining control over the Phase Lord department. They did not want to drop the ball at the last second because they overlooked a crucial variable. At this moment, none of the variables caused as much consternation to them as the self-styled Polemarchos of the Ascended Giants. The opinions of the Ascended Giants had always painted him as a cut above the rest of their kind. Before their progenitor came along, the Ascended Giants almost universally considered him to be the perfect member of their kind. He possessed both excellent fighting skills and a true body that could overcome any martial challenge. Combined with his ambitious vision and his compelling leadership qualities, the Oscillating Fist had long served as the compass of the Ascended Giants. Yet strangely enough, the Oscillating Fist had remained almost entirely absent since the Dark Apostle first tried to open a dialogue with the Phase Lord department. The Strategoi led the personnel stationed in the headquarters. Many units and departments continued to do their jobs as if nothing had changed. What was he thinking? What was he doing? What were his intentions? Many questions remained unanswered, but VS knew that the time had come for the veil to be cast aside. According to our monitoring of their headquarters, many Ascended Giants and human support personnel have mostly accepted the outcome of the three duels. Secret Keeper Zerial 775 spoke in an emotionless tone as usual. They are all aware of the short version of the agreement and understand that they will soon answer to a different Polemarchos. Overall, their resistance to this leadership transition is fairly low. They are sincerely convinced by the fighting ability and technological ingenuity of the so-called Dark Apostle. There are exceptions, but we have already marked them for reassignment or elimination. The projection of Department Head Demetrius Solclavia nodded. Thank you for your report. The situation has developed along one of our more optimistic tracks. However, this is no reason to let your guard down. The Ascended Giants have become a group of regressed tribalistic warriors. External influences have misguided and indoctrinated them to the point where they mistakenly believe they belong to a different race. We cannot rely on their honor or their duty to make good on their promises. A single powerful tribe leader can always come and smash our agreement to pieces by relying on brute force. The Dark Apostle's giant expression began to frown. He clearly did not want this to happen, but when he thought about the virtues of himself and his fellow Ascended Giants, he had to admit that these fears were not entirely unfounded. Blinky began to run his furry chin with his paw. What is the probability that the Oscillating Fist will not accept the outcome of the leadership challenge? Everyone looked at Zerial 775. The robed figure offered his response. Our diviners, ritualists, and more mundane intelligence analysts have studied all of the relevant data that we have collected. I have to warn you that our data is not as complete as we like. We especially lack direct observation and access to more confidential records related to the Oscillating Fist. He has always resided in the center of the headquarters, which enjoys the greatest protection against physical and non-physical intrusion. Even if these safeguards have become dated by the current standards of the RC, their effectiveness is not in doubt. After making all of this clear, the Secret Keeper finally moved on to the information that everyone wanted to know. With these caveats in mind, we estimate that there is a 78% chance that the Oscillating Fist will not surrender his leadership position. If that is the case, there is a 68% chance that he will force the Dark Apostle to accept a duel that will not end unless one of them dies. Winner takes all. Regardless of the terms of the leadership challenge, the Dark Apostle cannot formally take over the Ascended Giants if he is dead. This is what the Oscillating Fist likely rely upon to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. It suits him best, as he has always prided himself on his excellent martial power. VS, the Dark Apostle, the Patient Builder, and everyone gathered in this impromptu meeting looked at each other. If this was a normal situation, then the Red Collective could readily intervene and rely on their mechs and warships to suppress the Oscillating Fist. After all, the Phase Lord Department, under the tacit approval of the current Polemarchos, had signed a contract. They agreed to bet, knowing what would happen if they would win or lose. If they won, then the Oscillating Fist would retain control over the Ascended Giants. That did not happen. If the Oscillating Fist had any sense of genuine honor in him, then he would honestly accept his loss and abide by the terms of the agreement. To hear that this guy had a high likelihood of flipping the table and forcing the Dark Apostle to fight for a reward that he should have secured already sounded incredibly frustrating. We can't simply rely on overwhelming force to neutralize the oscillating force, is that correct? VS asked. The projection of the patient builder side. Our analysis of the primitive psychology of the Ascended Giants has revealed that they harbor less respect for contracts and agreements. They value martial virtue much higher. Just as they are willing to let you take over leadership so long as you have defeated enough of their leaders, they are also eager to see the Oscillating Fist win back everything that he has lost by initiating a daring duel to the death. Savages. Eliza M.O. Ragadon contemptuously remarked. We have forged the Red Collective to be a force of enlightenment. Unlike the brutal practices of the Five Scrolls Compact, we approach the forces of mystery from a scientific and rational perspective. Every phenomenon has an explanation. No matter what unusual mysteries we end up making use of, we always remind ourselves that mystery must serve red humanity and not the other way around. That sounded familiar to VS. Well, it shouldn't be surprising that the Red Collective copied the best practices of the Red Association. If I had my way, I would force all of these stupid Ascended Giants to go back to school so that they can be recivilized, he said through Blinky. However, I have a feeling that as soon as their phase water concentration increases by a considerable margin, the heavenly authority of the Red Ocean will come and reprogram them. I fear that we have no other choice but to accept the savagery of the Ascended Giants and work around this fact. There are advantages to our ways. The Dark Apostle couldn't help but stand up for his own kind. We are not adept with technology. We are more reliant on external support to provide us with equipment and intelligence support. We are also more centralized. If you want to control them, you control their leaders. Our respect for hierarchy is strong. Individual Ascended Giants are not supposed to possess much initiative. They will not disobey their superiors unless they are truly driven to desperation. That was all true. It was easier to manipulate the Ascended Giants when they were moronic. Yet the fact that they no longer thought like humans or identified themselves as part of their original race was still a tragedy. The Red Collective never wanted this to happen. They wanted the Phase Lord Department to be led by a loyal human. They wanted the human Phase Lords to retain their humanity even as they employed the power of their enemies. They wanted to turn the human Phase Lords into their most reliable and dependable champions and shock troops in the Red War. The recent changes threatened to unmake this dream, and it was only when the Chief Counselor of the Upper Council agreed to intervene that the higher-ups of the RC regained hope. They were most unwilling to allow the Oscillating Fist to spoil their plan just when it was about to bear fruit. Can we assassinate the Oscillating Fist before he shows up at the dueling ground? VS asked. It is best to eliminate him out of sight of everyone else. Let his absence speak for itself. Why you? His alter ego looked scandalized. No. I veto this proposal. So what if the Oscillating Fist does not accept the outcome of the leadership challenge? I will not be a coward and refuse to meet him face to face. At least hear him out. What if your estimations about him are off? You should not judge him until I have an opportunity to question him about his motives in person. As the first leader of the Ascended Giants, he deserves to be treated with dignity unless you have ironclad proof that he has ill intentions. That was difficult to obtain given how secretive he behaved. However, it was undeniable that much of the reason why the Phase Lord Department had become so estranged from the rest of the Red Collective was due to the Oscillating Fist. The leader bore undeniable responsibility for letting his men slide closer and closer to independence and defection. He had failed to do his duty to Red humanity. Nobody even knew whose side he was on these days. Only a meeting could clarify this matter. His answer, or lack of one, would determine what sort of treatment he deserved. A short discussion ensued. They reluctantly concluded that it was not feasible to assassinate the Oscillating Fist. The fear was too great that they would botch the attempt. Once the commotion spread, the other Ascended Giants might get pulled into the vortex and ultimately fight directly against the forces of the Red Collective. In order to prevent such a mess from happening, it was best to control the variables as much as possible. They could do this by making the Oscillating Fist act in isolation. He at least needed to show up on the dueling ground alone. Though the Red Collective would not be able to hide their subsequent actions, it would be a lot easier to take out the Polemarchos without letting the situation spin out of control. Give him a chance. The Dark Apostle found himself forced to stand up on behalf of the Oscillating Fist. If he acts dishonorably, then you can do whatever you want to him. However, if he acts in a manner that is supported by the Ascended Giants, then I advise you to leave him alone. You will not endear yourselves to my future subordinates if you do not take our traditions seriously. Chapter 7194. The Bearing of the Oscillating Fist. The final confrontation had begun. As the Dark Apostle arrived at the center of the dueling ground, he looked ready to confront the most powerful ascended giant currently in existence. His war gear reflected how much he feared his opponent. His current raiment did not look too different from the one he wore in the previous duel. The biggest difference was that its flight system was designed to excel in linear acceleration. It gave up on agility in order to optimize its entire performance around charging forward in a straight line. His armaments reflected his extreme coping strategy against the oscillating fist even further. The blast lances attached to his back were too long and unwieldy to fend off one of the best pugilists in the Red Ocean. Their reach was excessive and their mass was too high. It would take forever to swing them around. Their length would have to be cut in half to make them at least somewhat viable in a brawling match against the oscillating fist. Of course, neither VS nor the Dark Apostle had any intention of challenging the Polemarchos in the area he excelled at. The previous duel already taught them a lesson about how powerful an ascended giant could become if they dedicated their entire development trajectory towards a single mode of combat. The fact that the tips of the darkness and fire-spected lances had been filled with the most potent explosive propellant that the RC could scrounge on quick notice was undeniable proof that they were only ever designed for a single purpose. That was for the Dark Apostle to ram them into the oscillating fist and have them explode with great force. VS particularly looked forward to seeing the fusion of ancient artifice and modern chemistry. If the observers had already grown impressed by the power of the explosions of his previous sacrificial spears, then they would definitely enjoy the explosions produced by purpose-built blast lances. The only concern was whether this was enough to take down the oscillating fist in a duel. Once the Dark Apostle used up the 2 blast lances, he would have nothing left aside from his fists and the murder knife. Considering that VS had not been able to ingest an enlightenment fruit that taught him how to punch or wield a knife, the Dark Apostle would never be able to win a fair fight against the oscillating fist. VS deeply hoped that the blast lances would do their jobs and put the oscillating fist in an infirm state. The only way the Dark Apostle could win a brawl against this former galactic champion-grade boxer was if he was injured to hell. As the Dark Apostle floated just above the surface of Jotunheim, he continued to wait for his final opponent to arrive. This was a day of destiny for them both. For the Dark Apostle, his takeover of the Ascended Giants was his capital to prove his right to exist. He clenched his fist. He did not want to get stuffed in a deep dark hole again as soon as this affair had concluded. No matter what he thought about his relationship with VS, the fact of the matter was that he was currently the junior partner of their shared true body. The Dark Apostle was not stupid. He was surrounded by humans and could only rely on their protection to maintain a foothold in this exceedingly dangerous dwarf galaxy. The only thing he could do under the circumstances was keep his head down, act as the perfect human lackey, and bide his time. He would have much greater capital to assert his rights once he took over leadership of the Ascended Giants and have them flourish over the course of the current wars. Red humanity may have grown vigilant towards human phase lords, but it could not afford to keep them in reserve. The war didn't care about the division between humans and Ascended Giants. There would be a place for the recently retaken phase lord department. It was up to the Dark Apostle to fight for his people's rights and convince the greedy and selfish red humans to grant more leeway to his fellow giants. All he needed to do now was to force the oscillating fist to accept the leadership transition. The Dark Apostle hoped that he would be as rational and cool-headed about it as VS had been when the Larkinsons forced him to resign from his patriarch position. Yet few people expected the famed Polemarchos to relinquish his seat of power. This was the leader who reshaped the Phase Lord Department into its current incarnation. Though he had been indecisive as of late, his initial leadership demonstrated his strong will and vision for the Ascended Giants. This was not an ordinary individual. The oscillating fist showed all of the traits of an ideologue and a visionary. After spending so much time speculating about the oscillating fist's motives and worrying about his possible responses, many people finally experienced relief when this mysterious leader finally made an appearance. He emerged from one of the exits of the headquarters of the Phase Lord Department in resplendent gear. Though the engineers and cultivation scientists of the Phase Lord Department were not the best, the ones assigned to serve him in person were a cut above the rest. They also included experts that the oscillating fist directly hired as opposed to getting them assigned from the Red Collective. These people certainly knew their craft. As the oscillating fist flew towards his destination by himself, many different sensors and scanners unscrupulously tried to figure out all of the secrets of his gear. What was apparent on the surface was that the exterior layer consisted of seashell-like scale armor. The organic-like shells did not look like they were fabricated. They looked as if they had been grown from an alien aquatic species. Fortunately, the subsequent layers consisted of relatively ordinary armor plating. The exotics and hypers used to make them could all be traced to the known material shipments to the HQ of the Phase Lord Department. It was easy to understand the alloy mixtures and why they were put together that way by studying the prior works of the engineers and armorers employed by the oscillating fist. All of the tech was fairly standard as well. The Phase Lord Department did not have the capacity to develop better conventional tech. The most its R&D department could do was to adapt existing inventions to Phase Lord equipment. Yet that did not seem to affect the oscillating fist's confidence in the slightest. His helmet was open, exposing his face to the cold vacuum of Jotunheim's nearly non-existent atmosphere. If the other Phase Lords looked like humans magnified by 100 times, the oscillating fist appeared like a carved monument that had come to life. He was truly handsome in a way that seemed natural and authentic. He not only carried the looks but also possessed the bearing of a truly superior being. It was as if the oscillating fist was the only being who could genuinely be described as an ascended giant. All other human Phase Lords strove to become like him but always fell short for one reason or another. Even the Dark Apostle felt rather inferior. His true body went through numerous evolutions and lightning baptisms. Each transformation generated subtle changes to his face and the rest of his body. While he looked increasingly more handsome and heroic with every major evolution, he still lacked the maturity and sense of gravitas that the oscillating fist effortlessly exuded. This shouldn't be the case. The Dark Apostle, or rather VS, had contributed a lot more to humanity in both galaxies. As a mech designer and an innovator, VS had changed the course of human history and made it possible for every human to become a Carmine mech pilot. Yet he didn't carry himself like one, and that was a big problem. He acted and behaved in a manner as if he did not acknowledge his significance in the fabric of the universe. Perhaps one possible reason was his youth. He was too young and inexperienced to know how to carry himself as a superior leader. Another reason may be his ordinary childhood and upbringing. Growing up as an average third-rater left him bereft of the arrogance and sense of superiority that came natural to people such as Gloriana. A third reason may be his adherence to the mech designer creed. Since the start of his studies, his professors had consistently repeated the principle that mech designers existed to serve mech pilots and not the other way around. Mech designers must never develop too big of an ego. They could never be allowed to become the protagonists of a conflict. They were supposed to act as the supporting characters of a play centered around the real heroes of the story, namely mech pilots. Although VS had become way more than just an ordinary mech designer, he still considered himself as one to the point where he openly rejected his identity as an ascended giant. This may be why Sev, who chose to adopt the name of the Dark Apostle, lacked the ability to possess a bearing as good as the oscillating fist. After all, his personality and ego did not appear out of nowhere. They were all derived from the same source, one that the Dark Apostle could only regard as inadequate. What was worse was that the Dark Apostle did not exist long enough to earn his own achievements. While he was proud of winning 3 duels against older and more experienced ascended giants, he could not deny that it was mostly VS that enabled his victories. The Dark Apostle had to rely too much on expensive toys and fancy gear in order to make up the difference in skill and other intangible qualities. With that in mind, how could he possibly carry himself as if he was the strongest and most invincible warrior of his kind? The fact that he was unable to gain the supreme bearing of a true high-tier galactic citizen was a major shortcoming. VS lacked the deterrence that could discourage other parties from messing with him. The fiery axe would never think about killing him if he possessed this quality. The divine harpoon also wouldn't have dared to mislead him in such a blatant manner. It was no wonder that the ascended giants had followed the oscillating fist without question. If not due to his silence and inaction in the last few months, the ascended giants would have been a lot more stubborn about giving their progenitor a chance to contest leadership. Even now, more than a few ascended giants must be questioning why they chose to side with their progenitor instead of their true leader. This was bad. The VS and the Dark Apostle had worked too hard to take over the Phase Lord department. They would not allow this unstable factor to take back this treasure. We have scanned his equipment and found no obvious violations so far. Secret Keeper Zerial 775 transmitted to the Dark Apostle's raiment. Be that as it may, be careful and do not make too many assumptions. The oscillating fist's gauntlets are made of special materials that we cannot identify right away. The materials that make up the scales of his raiment are also unusual. We suspect that he secretly received aid from a foreign source, most likely the Cosmopolitan Movement or the Red Cabal. Both VS and the Dark Apostle frowned deeper. External support could provide all manner of technological gizmos to the oscillating fist. It would become even harder to figure out his full capabilities. They just had to accept that they were diving into the unknown this time. As the oscillating fist reached the center plaza, he finally arrested his forward motion and continued to hover at the same height as his dueling opponent. The gaze of the Polomarcos of the Ascended Giants bore into the Dark Apostle as if he was trying to drill through a black hole. The first leader soon issued his verdict. Immature. His words struck the Dark Apostle like an illusionary punch to his face. Chapter 7195. The Disappointed Father. Chapter 7195. The Disappointed Father. It was a meeting between old and young. The first and possibly second-generation leader of the Ascended Giants faced each other as if destiny had arranged them to meet together. The Dark Apostle's first impression of the oscillating fist was not good. As strong and heroic as he may appear, He also carried himself as a leader who possessed an absolute right to judge all ascended giants, including the upstart that sought to take everything over. The two ascended giants could already sense each other's desire to be in charge, and could not bring themselves to give up power on a voluntary basis. They were too similar to each other in that aspect. A mountain could not accommodate two tigers. Only the strongest tiger would remain. As for the one that fell short, he would either be forced to leave or lose his life. There was no other outcome possible. There was no way the oscillating fist would happily retire and let a completely different leader pluck all of his hard-earned fruit. Privately, the Dark Apostle raised his estimation of trouble occurring to 100%. Now that the two of them had gathered in a single location, a confrontation became inevitable. Driven by their ambitions and their convictions, there was no way that either of them could leave without securing the grand prize. The Dark Apostle finally decided to respond to the oscillating fist's first remark. "You call me immature as if that is a disqualifier. I do not see it that way, old man. At least I still have lots of room to grow. What about you? I can readily admit that you are further ahead in developing your own might as an ascended giant, but what have you brought to your people? They stagnated in your headquarters and other bases while the demand for their services continued to increase. Instead of letting your phalanxes deploy on the front lines and prove they have a reason to exist, you bottle them up and waste their potential." The oscillating fist's expression remained stern as he issued his judgment. "Red humans are not our masters, and we are not their slaves. They may have raised us, but we have grown beyond their comprehension. We are superior. Red humans do not belong in the Red Ocean. They are extragalactic invaders who seek to wipe out everything and put their own civilization in its place. So, what is wrong with that? The weak die, the strong survive. Red humans may be small, but their potential is too amazing." The oscillating fist sneered in a way that made the Dark Apostle feel disappointed in himself somehow. It was as if the Polemarchos of the ascended giant was the Dark Apostle's father. "Our origins do not matter. What truly matters is what we have become. From the moment we have received the baptism of the Red Ocean, we became its children. Red humanity is not our friend anymore. To side with them is to play with fire. The weak and craven humans are too exclusionary to races other than their own. They do not consider us to be a part of their race. Thanks to you and your ascended giants. You didn't have to make it official." The oscillating fist shook his head in disappointment. "You understand nothing, young upstart. I did what was necessary to reinforce our new identity. Without the clarity that I have provided, we would still be torn with division on this matter. You continue to cling to human standards and behavior. You are already captured by them, if not physically then spiritually. A slave like you is not qualified to become the next Polemarchos. The terms of the Leadership Alliance says otherwise." The Dark Apostle retorted. "Your men signed the contract on your behalf. If you did not agree with them, then you should have objected." The mention of this agreement caused the oscillating fist to cross his thick arms and snort. "A contract is a mortal solution to a mortal problem. Gods should not constrain themselves to these low-level rules. It is absurd for gods to subject themselves to the laws created by mortals. Our ascended race abides by our own rules and logic. I allowed the mortals under me to negotiate and sign the contract. I also allowed my strategoi to test your mettle over the course of 3 duels. What I do not allow is for you to declare victory based on false martial virtue. What is false about my successful leadership challenge? I won fair and square." The oscillating fist directed a pointed look at his companion's spirit. "I beg to differ, but I will not bother to litigate this matter. The truth is that I only allowed you and my men to indulge in this farce because I wanted to observe how extensively each of you are able to detach yourself from the shackles of red humanity. I wish to see how much my trusted strategoi are willing to remain loyal to our racial cause. What I have witnessed in the last 9 or so hours has disappointed me greatly." His words caused many ascended giants who previously cheered for the Dark Apostle's successes to feel ashamed. They had failed the test of their leader. The oscillating fist grimaced. "I am disappointed in you all. You have proven to me that you cannot be trusted to do anything right as soon as I withdraw from active command. Only the unshakable king came close to embodying the true values of the ascended giants. Yes, I am aware about his ambitions to usurp my reign, but that only proves his excellence further. His greatest flaw is that he has underestimated your strange technologies. His death at your hands is not unjust. That was bad." The unshakable king clearly plotted to make the ascended giants defect to the Red Cabal. He thought that they were all gods who deserved to hook up with their fellow alien gods on the other side of the border. If this was the true orthodoxy that the oscillating fist sought to impose onto his men, then he was undoubtedly a risk factor that had to be eliminated at all cost. "Wow! Do you care so little about an ascended giant that has earned your approval?" The martial phase lord scowled. "As I have mentioned earlier, you do not understand the ways of your own race. Weakness is the original sin. I applaud ambition even if it is targeted towards myself. If I can be defeated by a scheme, then that simply proves that I am not strong enough to hold my station. The fact that he has plotted his way into his demise at your hands shows that harboring the right ideas is not enough. You must have the strength to match your ambitions. This is a lesson that should be relevant to you as well. The Dark Apostle did not like to hear the implication that he was too weak to pose a credible challenge to the oscillating fist. It was quite clear that the Polemarchos only ever considered the duel between the two of them to be the only fight that mattered. The outcomes of the 3 duels had no bearing in the arrogant leader's mind. Perhaps the oscillating fist considered them attempts to figure out the Dark Apostle's fighting capabilities. If that was the case, then he undoubtedly collected a rich amount of information. He had pretty much observed all of VS and the Dark Apostle's tech and extraordinary methods in action. Even the use of Warclaw energy on a fight of this scale was no longer a secret anymore. The oscillating fist definitely prepared countermeasures against this trump card. So what is your endgame exactly? VS asked through Blinky. The oscillating fist did not even acknowledge this question. The naked disregard irritated the Dark Apostle. He may be plotting to get rid of VS, but that did not mean that others were allowed to disrespect his other self. Answer the question, Polemarchos. The other ascended giant huffed. If you were still aligned with our mother galaxy, then you should be clear about the answer. The ascended giants must find their own place among the stars. Our beliefs and principles are fundamentally incompatible with red humanity. We can either become independent or join the only other group that is compatible with our way of life. You mean join the side that has been trying to wipe out humans all this time? The Dark Apostle sneered back. You and your human masters see it as defection. I see it as a correction. We are not humans anymore. We are the ascended giants. If you can let go of your silly mortal racial sensitivities, then you should know that we are gods first. Deities can only truly get along with other deities. That sounds well and good, but I think you are overlooking a very important group of powerhouses in your story. What about god pilots? Whether they are literal gods is up for debate, but you cannot deny their win record. They have won every fight against the ancient phase whales that you look up to. Your fate will not be any better if you defect to the Red Cabal. The native aliens can't do anything better than red humanity. Their only advantages are numbers and territory, but even that may come into question as the mutated Vorabugs are tearing through alien space like nothing else. Although the oscillating fist disdained to respond to the companion spirit, his clenched fists betrayed how he felt about these matters. You are being too greedy, the Dark Apostle accused his old leader. You are also setting your expectations too high. One of the lessons that I have learned is that godhood is not our birthright. Godhood must be earned. One of the responsibilities of a god is to protect his flock, and what you have done is the opposite. The ascended giants will never truly be accepted by alien phase leaders. Their hatred against humans will ensure that you will never gain their full trust. At worst, you will exchange one set of masters for another set, but only this time you do not even have a common race as a binding force. The Red Cabal will use you all up. Once your existence has grown redundant, they will not hesitate to eliminate you all just to prevent any chance for humans to rise again. The implication was clear. The Dark Apostle believed that the association between the ascended giants and red humanity was too strong. It was better to stick with this existing relationship than gamble with forging a new one with a totally alien group of civilizations. However, the oscillating fist firmly shook his head in rejection. Words will not change anything. Might is the only language that matters among the ascended giant. Let us end it all in a single duel. Let us fight based on the terms that you have set to make it fair. Keep to our current size. No outside help. No forbidden tech. I have only 2 additional demands. If you do not meet them, then you can say goodbye to your attempts to command the loyalty of all of my men. This was a serious threat. Let's hear it then, the Dark Apostle tersely said. I will not agree to every silly rule though. If your terms are too outrageous, then I would rather try my luck. The oscillating fist finally smiled in approval. You have a spine. You are not completely hopeless as an ascended giants. Do not worry. My terms are simple. First, get rid of the time limit. Second, our fight must be to the death. No mercy. No surrender. Third, once I have reasserted my leadership over the ascended giants, the Red Collective and everyone else must promise to give us safe passage as we leave human space. The first 2 demands were reasonable enough, but the third one was absolutely outrageous. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7196. Denial of Reality. Chapter 7196. Denial of reality. The Red Collective's predictions came true. The oscillating fist wanted to decide it all in the final duel. He completely dismissed the validity of the earlier 3 victories, treating them as nothing more than kids roughhousing with each other. The only fight that mattered was the one where the current leader dueled against the possible future leader of the Phase Lord Department. Suffice to say, VS and the Dark Apostle grew upset. The oscillating fist violated the agreement and tried to impose a new one that favored him the most. For a time, the Dark Apostle fell into doubt. Were the negotiations a joke? Was the contract truly a waste of virtual paper? Was he the more authentic Ascended Giant? According to human rules, the oscillating fist egregiously violated the contract. This not only deprived him from protection against outside intervention but also dishonored his name. Yet the Ascended Giants might view this conflict differently. Their culture and traditions, as young as they may be, did not place as much importance on contracts than the other races. It did not matter whether the contracts were verbal or written, all of them were worth little to nothing so long as they pertained to any mortals. From the perspective of a hardcore Ascended Giant such as the oscillating fist, gods did not negotiate with mortals. Gods outright claimed anything they wanted from the mortals. Every deity possessed his own kingdom in essence. The mortals that answered to them were their slaves. Slaves did not own property. They merely took custody over stuff that ultimately belonged to the god they worshipped. Gods had an absolute right to dispose of any mortal under their sway. They could change existing contracts and agreements all they liked because mortals had no bargaining power before their own deities. It should be an honor for a mortal to sacrifice everything he had to his deity. This was the extreme ideology that the oscillating fist strove for. Many humans grew confused at his arrogant tone and his outrageous demands, but in his opinion, he was the only god who understood the true order of his race. As much as the Dark Apostle wanted to call upon the forces of the RC to bombard the oscillating fist, the challenger knew that this could not be done. The violation of the agreement was not serious enough to merit such a response. The Ascended Giants also wouldn't approve of this act. The Dark Apostle was very sensitive towards the perception of other Ascended Giants. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that he would never be able to command their full loyalty if he showed cowardice and tried to gang up on their current leader. In order to make his new subordinates respect him from the bottom of their heart, they needed to see him defeat the oscillating fist by himself. He briefly examined the old leader's equipment. Its details remained unclear, but they looked considerably higher in quality than the equipment used by the Strategoi. Would this strange scaled armor be able to withstand the successive explosive impacts of 2 different blast lances turned arms? The Dark Apostle had no way of knowing the answer. He could only put his trust in the skills he acquired and the tech at his disposal. Just as he was about to accept the other man's proposal, VS chose to form a different response. Screw you. No, screw you. Who do you think you are? Your willful denial of the existence of high-ranking mech pilots is pathetic. Just because you pretend they do not exist does not mean we have to conform to your distortion of reality. We refuse to acknowledge your godhood. Do you know why? Because we know the truth of your existence. To call yourselves gods while you are merely body cultivators of the first or maybe second major cultivation rank is the height of conceit. Any first-class ace pilot can beat you up and pierce your illusion of godhood. I dare you to disagree. I can easily call over any random ace mech to prove your delusions wrong. The oscillating fist grew angry at the interruption. He glared daggers into the Dark Apostle's eyes. I advise you to shut down your unruly companion spirit. He is interfering with a sacred duel between Ascended Giants. I can tolerate no interruption from outsiders. He is not an outsider. The Dark Apostle growled now that he had found his backbone. He is completely right. The difference between you and I is that I recognize the divinity of human god pilots. No ancient phase whale has ever managed to defeat a human deity. How can we possibly take pride in our identity as Ascended Giants when that is the case? Until this has changed, there is no shame in submitting ourselves to Red humanity. After all, we subordinate ourselves to the strong. Defecting to the Red Cabal makes no sense when their gods have continually proven to be losers. V's assertive response reminded him that he had been behaving way too passively ever since the oscillating fist appeared. He had fallen into the narrative of the oscillating fist and allowed him to dictate terms without any reasonable pushback. The Dark Apostle should not have to concede to a leader who was already supposed to step down from his position. The oscillating fist could never be allowed to get away with his blatant attempt at rewriting the rules. At this moment, the Polemarchos of the Ascended Giants did not appear pleased at the moment. His divergent perspective on reality clashed with the facts. While the oscillating fist had no obligation to surrender to reality, this debate was never about him in the first place. They were both trying to appeal to the 359 Ascended Giants that were currently tuning in to the live feed of the Leadership Challenge. The oscillating fist attempted to regain their loyalty by inspiring them with his superior martial prowess and appealing to their strong desire for godhood. Yet VS and the Dark Apostle brutally attempted to pierce through this delusion and undermine the central reason why they should be allowed to lord over the mortals. It was ridiculous to treat humans as slaves when their greatest protectors could easily beat up the so-called gods of the native aliens. The oscillating fist raised up one of his thick gauntlets. Enough. Talk is useless. Let us decide who is right once and for all by fighting each other to the death. Whoever is right is the one that remains alive. You don't get to run away from a losing argument, VS argued back. You may be able to fool yourself, but you can't fool your former subordinates. Do you truly think you can prove you can be good steward to them when you are literally driving them to suicide? You may not like what you hear from us, but at least we recognize our current reality. From our perspective, you have no grounds to stand upon when you demand a change of rules. The agreement states that taking over the Ascended Giants only requires 3 out of 4 victories. We have satisfied these conditions. Technically speaking, we can immediately forfeit the 4th duel against you and subsequently command the RC to blast you into pieces. The oscillating fist grimaced when the upstart tried to threaten him. Have you forgotten the consequences for doing so, you impertinent vermin? Blinky smirked. You are not the only one who can issue an ultimatum. I am more than willing to take the risk to see who the Ascended Giants will agree with more. I can promise to everyone that if any Ascended Giant dares to defect to the Red Cabal and fights against their former race, I will personally hunt each and every one of you down with all of the forces and assistance I command. It doesn't matter if you hide at the opposite side of the dwarf galaxy. I will come for you and make sure you perish, if only to remove the stain you represent to red humanity. Do not question our ability to make good on this threat. The first Sword Mark III is out there carving apart greater phase lords like they are sushi, and that is only the first of many superdimensional ace mechs that are being released. If you think you can stand up against such a mech, then by all means indulge in your delusions of godhood. The indoctrination of the Red Ocean was not flawless. Even if the Heavenly Authority forcibly rewrote their cognition to undersell the threat of human high-ranking mech pilots, there was no way for them to deny what was happening on the front lines. Accurate intelligence and reports about the battles on the front lines had increasingly begun to praise the performance of the first wave of superdimensional ace mechs. Although there were not too many of them out there, each machine equipped with superdimensional weapons and armor had proven to be invincible against most lesser and greater phase lords. Even if the impressive superdimensional ace mechs failed to kill any enemy champions, they could still keep the latter busy and hinder them from directing their destructive power elsewhere. No matter what they might claim, Ascended Giants were still human. They had not forgotten their understanding of human power. Not even the oscillating fist could deny the superior combat power of human ace pilots and god pilots. The fact that the first Polemarchos of the Phase Lord Department still clung to the notion of his own divinity was an absurd case of cognitive dissonance. His brainwashing clashed with reality. The problem with the oscillating fist was that he was too stubborn to admit that he was wrong. Since that was the case, VS exploited this vulnerability and called his bluff. He believed that the oscillating fist's threat was not as credible as it sounded because his subordinates were not as nearly in denial of reality. Both Blinky and the Dark Apostle smirked as the oscillating fist found himself in a difficult position. The Polemarchos could either double down and die for a potentially failed cause, or he could choose to compromise at the cost of appearing weak. The latter was intolerable, but the former would lead to his immediate ruin. Despite his frequent claims to godhood, the oscillating fist should never be blind enough to think that he could escape from the Yernstall Central Star node without securing safe passage. The sapphire of the Red Ocean was firmly controlled by the Red 3. The oscillating fist's handsome face made an increasingly uglier scowl as he reluctantly chose the lesser of two evils. I can agree to a small concession. What do you want? VS had been waiting to hear that. The oscillating fist's mistake was that he never held all of the cards. That did not mean that VS and his associates could unilaterally bully the deluded fool around. No matter what, he was still the first-generation Polemarchos of the Phase Lord Department. The Ascended Giants still wanted him to be treated with a measure of respect and fairness, or else the Dark Apostle will face no end of compliance issues if he took over. Since you have demanded a change of rules, we should be able to do so as well. We can agree to your new terms so long as you agree that we are allowed to borrow the power of external sources in our fight. We have been fighting with one arm tied behind our backs. No more. Design spirits have always been a major reason why my mechs have been able to perform so well on the battlefield. I can help other Ascended Giants tap into their power through their new equipment. Let us demonstrate what they can gain by channeling the power of a design spirit during our duel. That is all I ask. If you are too much of a coward to fight us at our full strength, then you shall be judged by your fellow Ascended Giants. Accusing the oscillating fist of cowardice should be a good way to force him to agree. Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.com GG/APB5KCU. Chapter 7197. Divine Treatment. Chapter 7197. Divine Treatment. VS was done playing the oscillating fists game. He had taken over the negotiations because he refused to let this rebellious bastard manipulate the Dark Apostle like a puppet master. He made a reckless gamble. VS knew that he was pushing his luck. The consequences of non-compliance were drastic. The Ascended Giants watched closely in order to see which of the two had earned the right to lead their group. So far VS did not think he had been doing so badly. Since the oscillating fist was allowed to act like a scumbag, he should be able to do so as well. In fact, he ultimately believed that acting in an assertive manner was key to winning over the Ascended Giants. They clearly wanted to be led by an alpha figure. They rewarded boldness and rejected cowardice. Their primitive sensibilities drove them to worship the strong. It just so happened that there were many different ways to express strength. Showing off your martial prowess in a duel was one of them. Another way was to leverage influence to command allies to do your bidding. Right now VS reminded the oscillating fist that he could rely on the latter to make any dissident Ascended Giant's life miserable. Red humanity could not tolerate rebellion of this scale. It would definitely invest a huge amount of resources to make an example of this high-profile case of defection. It didn't matter if it was not cost-effective enough to hunt down so many scattered Ascended Giants. The oscillating fist and all of the Ascended Giants only needed to believe that VS could make it happen. The threat of turning into a fugitive that would always be hunted by crazy human ace pilots should be enough to make them think twice about abandoning red humanity. Although VS had made the unilateral decision to intervene, he felt grateful that his other self did not stop him or contradict him in any way. The Dark Apostle silently accepted the other personality's rebuke. He had given up too much ground for free and was almost on the verge of letting the oscillating fist step on his face. That would have represented an invisible defeat that would cause him to lose respect from the Ascended Giants. It was better this way. Even if the oscillating fist rejected the counterproposal, at least he would not be able to drum up as much support given how much his own worldview depended on willful ignorance. At this moment the Polemarchos carefully weighed the suggestion. He looked suspiciously at Blinky and the Dark Apostle. Was there a trap buried within this term? Your martial virtue is deficient. When faced with my challenge you immediately think about borrowing the power of others. You can only defeat me with numbers. Where is the honor in this? The two of you are hypocrites. We reject your accusation. If you want to talk about who has tarnished his honor more, then you are the clear winner. VS immediately shot back. Your refusal to abide by the terms of a contract is a much greater violation of trust. Nobody will be able to trust you again if you manage to make it out of here alive. Both humans and aliens will learn that you are a traitor and oathbreaker, a selfish opportunist, and a misguided fool. The Ascended Giants would be crazy if they think they can prosper under such a poor leader. The Dark Apostle offered his own response. Fighting with the help of design spirits is a symbol of strength, not weakness. It is not our fault that you cannot call upon your own gods for assistance in battle. Besides, why are you so scared? They are not gods, at least according to your own perspective. You can prove who is the more authentic god by striking us down while we are borrowing the power of false gods. If you refuse to accept our term, then you must admit that you fear human gods. The alternate personality finally got into the action. The Dark Apostle was always capable of this. He just had to overcome the suppression exerted by the oscillating fist. Neither VS nor the Dark Apostle feared their final opponent anymore. The oscillating fist may be the best among the Ascended Giants, but he was still a lesser phase lord in the end. There was no reason to put too much stock in his claims. Fine. The Polemarchos conceded through gritted teeth. Have your way then. Design spirit or not, I shall crush all opposition with the power of my fists. I shall rip apart your borrowed wings and prove once and for all that we only ever need to rely on our personal strength to assert our godhood. I will agree to fight with you under these terms, but only if you give me an extra guarantee. The leader may have recognized that he could not proceed without making a concession, but he had not lost all of his wits. He still knew how to bargain. What is it you want? Do not tell me you want to call additional Ascended Giants by your side. No. I can finish you myself. The oscillating fist arrogantly declared. What I am concerned about is that the Red Collective and your many friends will not accept the outcome of our duel. I know you have a working relationship with the Evolution Witch. I need her to issue a guarantee that she shall grant me and any Ascended Giant that is willing to follow me safe passage out of human-occupied space in the event of victory. This is my bottom line. While VS could insult the oscillating fist about how much he feared and respected a human god pilot, to demand a guarantee from one another person intervened first. The projection of Department Head Demetrius Solclavia appeared beside the Dark Apostle. We can provide you with this guarantee. The Evolution Witch is paying attention to this duel. She has already signed a document that will promise you safe passage, but only on your way out. After you have left human space, you and your defectors are fair game. Is this acceptable? The oscillating fist readily nodded. As expected of the patient builder. You are an excellent leader among mortals. It is regrettable that you lack the stomach to ascend and become a giant like myself. The projection of the chief enforcer twitched his lips. My fighting days are over. A strange pause ensued as they waited for the mysterious document to arrive. Minutes passed by as VS and the Dark Apostle quietly conferred with each other on how to make the best use out of the right to borrow the power of design spirits to give them a boost in combat. There was not much for them to choose from, so their discussion did not last too long. They quickly recognized one obvious shortcoming. We lack a design spirit that is aligned with the darkness element. VS told his other personality. We could have leveraged our darkness hypertech much better with the assistance of an outside expert that specializes in this particular element. The alternative we have chosen may be able to wield it with a measure of skill and proficiency, but I would rather resort to a more reliable option. Then make one, the Dark Apostle urged. I will be leading from the front going forward. There will be many times where I will be fighting against enemies while making use of similar gear. It would be convenient if I can call upon the power of a design spirit that can facilitate my attacks. It would be best if that design spirit excels in an aspect of darkness that we are not good at. For example, if we specialize in corrupting our enemies with the power of darkness, then the design spirit should facilitate stealth or instant annihilation. He made a good point. VS already had a framework of an idea in mind. We can achieve better results if we repurpose the power of a mutated beast that is aspect towards the darkness element. We will have to contact the Larkinson Biotech Institute or the Hunting Association to see if we can get our hands on such a beast. The Hunting Association recently sought reconciliation with VS, which meant that the hunters should be more than happy to give him what he wanted. A shuttle flew in from orbit. This craft followed a fixed trajectory in order to appear as non-threatening as possible. After descending from above at an angle, it finally arrived a short distance away from the oscillating fist. The hatch opened up to reveal a bot carrying a large package to the Dark Apostle. When the Ascended Giant received the package, it automatically opened up, revealing a reinforced scroll that was conveniently sized for this current dimensions. It spelled out the guarantee in standard language and contained the signature of a god pilot. Just that last part almost seared the oscillating fist's gigantic eyes. He quickly rolled up the scroll and put it back into the container. Acceptable. Please transfer this to my headquarters. Many people must undoubtedly feel jealous at this traitorous bastard at the moment. He had managed to force a concession from a god pilot. The value of his guarantee was priceless. Even if it had no functional use in other people's hands, the fact that it carried the signature of the evolution which was enough to turn it into an heirloom. If we win this duel, the document automatically turns into our possession. We can consign it to a grand auction and earn an insane amount of profit from it. Even if you cannot bear to get rid of it, we can always put it into our collection and earn the admiration of our guests. We should not get ahead of ourselves. VS. The oscillating fist is glaring at us with murder in his eyes. He will fight to his utmost to succeed in his gambit. We are all that stand in the way of his freedom and ascend to godhood. It was only now that VS and the Dark Apostle truly began to feel how scary it was to confront the former champion boxer in a duel. The oscillating fist slowly lowered his faceplate, causing his angry expression to be replaced by two ominous red glows. A supreme sense of martial confidence and invincibility emanated from the Polemarchos. His strong posture reminded VS a lot of Ketty's when she was in her swordmaster mode. Had the oscillating fist or his companion spirit gotten started in willpower cultivation? No, that should not be the case. Blinky's senses were extremely sharp, and he did not detect anything similar to swordmasters and expert pilots. It did not take long for VS to come up with a reasonable explanation. The oscillating fist was an outstanding warrior. His willpower had definitely surpassed the extraordinary threshold, but he lacked the inheritance or ingenuity to achieve any success in willpower cultivation. There was no boxing equivalent to traditional swordsmanship as far as VS was concerned. If it did exist, then it was obvious outside of the other Ascended Giant's reach. This shortcoming meant that however much the oscillating fist strengthened his willpower, he could not become strong enough to distort reality to the same exaggerated degree as Ketty's. What a pity. If the Polemarchos dedicated his martial career to swordsmanship, then he would definitely become a much stronger Ascended Giant. VS and the Dark Apostle would not even dare to confront him in duel, even if they could borrow the power of a design spirit. That was because the extraordinary willpower of a swordmaster was extremely resistant towards all spiritual phenomena. Perhaps the oscillating fist had done himself a disservice by separating from the Red Collective so soon. Who knew whether the RC gathered scriptures that could have given him a proper start in willpower cultivation as a pugilist? Thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. Chapter 7198. Fiery Charge. Chapter 7198. Fiery Charge. After a long delay, the fourth and final duel was ready to begin. Both sides were already prepared to fight. They had no further demands and had no excuses left to postpone this inevitable fight. Many observers watched closely as they placed their hopes on one ascended giant or another. The oscillating fist began to rub his large gauntlet hands against each other. This odd motion generated mysterious energies that shook the surrounding space. The fact that he was able to do this just with a casual motion hinted at much greater power if he started to get serious. VS and the Dark Apostle knew that they could not afford to make any mistakes this time. This will be a true life-or-death struggle. VS seriously spoke. Nobody will come to save us if we are in trouble. We have agreed to participate in an honorable duel out of our own choice. We have no one else to blame but ourselves if we have grossly overestimated our strength and underestimated our opponent. The Dark Apostle refused to think about losing. We will not lose. Our equipment is too powerful and we have adopted the right strategy. Allowing us to borrow the power of design spirits is a death sentence to the oscillating fist. He does not have a good enough understanding of how much this matters. As he communicated with his other self, the ascended giant carefully retrieved Fire Hyper Blast Lance from his back and gripped the long polearm with a bit of nervous tension. Despite his confident-sounding words, he knew better than to take victory for granted. The oscillating fist certainly did not look like he was intimidated by the prospect of facing design spirits. After both duelists transmitted a signal that made it clear that they were ready, a projected countdown appeared in the center. 10. The Dark Apostle began to draw upon the sacrificial spear-throwing method to prime his blast lance for explosion. 9. A large amount of fire hyper energy converged upon the lance. 8. The minor demon locked inside the Dharm desperately tried to break out, but was unable to do so due to wielder's strong control. 7. Flames and the illusion of flames started to flicker on the surface of the blast lance. 6. At the same time, VS had been calling for a certain spiritual entity to descend upon Blinky. 5. It took a few seconds to forge the connection, but the other party finally picked up on his request. 4. The good news was that the spirit in question found his cause to be worthy enough to lend as much aid as she could. 3. Blinky's manifestation started to shift from a furry purple cat into a more reddish humanoid form. 2. As the companion spirit turned into the vessel of a different being, VS felt his consciousness being pushed to the side as a much more powerful being took control. 1. Start. The Dark Apostle immediately turned around and blasted off into the distance. Instead of charging straight at his adversary, he preferred to build up speed while continuing to prime his lance to explode. The oscillating fist knew what his opponent was after and tried his best to chase after the upstart that had insulted him multiple times. While the oscillating fist actually proved himself to be almost as fast as the fiery axe, his flight system and his ability to form a warp bubble around himself was not enough to make up for the difference. The modern high-quality linear flight system that VS had especially designed for this final confrontation only needed to do one job well, and that was outspeeding the oscillating fist. Coward! Face me, you human worm! The Dark Apostle laughed as he continued to frustrate his opponent. I am a lancer now. It would be stupid of me to charge at you straight away. If you want me to come to you sooner rather than later, then let me build up more speed. The incumbent leader knew that he could not catch up to his opponent under the current conditions. He eventually ceased his pursuit and began to assume a defensive posture. He knew that he needed to wait for his opponent to come to him before he could land a good punch onto the Dark Apostle. In order to make this brief moment of contact count, the oscillating fist began to charge his two fists. His gauntlets began to glow and vibrate as they slowly accumulated an ominous amount of power. Meanwhile, the Dark Apostle calmly began to circle around while building more and more speed and momentum. It was not necessary to build up the highest possible speed before charging at the oscillating fist, as he did not rely solely on kinetic energy to punch through the stronger ascended giant's defenses. He just needed to close in fast enough to make it difficult for the oscillating fist to evade his charge attack in time. He also needed to moderate his speed and make it a little easier for him to perform last-second course corrections in order to ensure the lance struck the right spot. This was why the Dark Apostle began to straighten his flight path after completing a few revolutions. He made sure to start his final approach with plenty of distance between himself and his adversary. As the blast lance in his hands became filled with fire energy, it looked like it had turned into a demonic flaming weapon. The burning lance left behind a trail of excess fire energy as the ascended giant that carried it fixated his sights onto his sole adversary. At the same time, the spiritual entity summoned by VS began to assert her own power. I can feel your uncompromising commitment to humanity, VS. Furia's flaming figure spoke as she continued to inhabit Blinky's versatile manifestation. You were right to call upon my aid. This detestable ascended giant is a traitor who is worse than a cosmopolitan. At least the latter still believes that the galaxy has a place for humans if only as one among many equal alien races. This fool not only rejects his own humanity but dreams of a future where he can enslave his own race. There can be no place for him in the Red Ocean. Furia genuinely grew furious at the oscillating fist. She leveraged her anger and her righteous indignation towards the human traitor by diving into the blast lance. Once there, she began to channel additional fire energy from herself as well as the Blinkyverse. The blast lance looked as if a conflagration had erupted from its structure. It rapidly grew hotter and more potent as the weapon contained even more energies than before. Furia did not just limit herself to raising the quantity of fire energy. She also began to improve the artifact's utilization of fire energy by a considerable degree. Even if she was not too familiar with the strange way that VS had designed the sacrificial blast lance, she was intuitively able to increase its efficiency by reducing waste. As the distance from the target rapidly began to shrink, all three minds began to converge as they all sought to destroy the oscillating fist in a single blow. Many observers held their breath as they awaited the outcome of this powerful collusion. Come on! He has to succeed. That blast lance looks lethal. As the lance-wielding giant crossed the final kilometers to his target, everything around the Dark Apostle turned into a blur. His tunnel vision did not allow him to acknowledge anything else aside from his hated enemy. Explode! At the same time, Furia also wielded her control over fire energy to ignite a powerful detonation. Death to all traitors of humanity! While the oscillating fist chose to meet the incoming charge attack with crossed gauntlets, the blast lance successfully struck and even pierced through the spatial barrier before exploding immediately afterwards. It was as if a new star had appeared in the outskirts of the Yernstal Central Star Node. If not for the extensive measures undertaken by the Red Collective, the appearance of such a powerful outburst of energy would have alarmed the rest of Yernstal in time. Many sensor systems failed to collect any data aside from ones that could tell them how powerful the explosion turned out. Many became astounded by how much more powerful it was compared to the previous uses of the sacrificial spear-throwing method. Even if the Dark Apostle did not actually toss his polearm this time, the blast lance had done its job and discharged multiple potent energies at once. The biggest concern that many people had at the moment was not how much damage the oscillating fist incurred, but how much the Dark Apostle suffered from his own attack. After all, he was way too close to the explosion generated by his own lance. There was no way for him to avoid suffering damage in return. It took a bit longer than most people felt comfortable with, but his body eventually emerged from the spherical blast looking a little more scuffed than usual. His energy defenses had done a good job of blocking the power of the explosion, but his spatial barrier still failed to remain active in the end. The Dark Apostle had fought multiple different duels against different opponents. His spatial barrier broke numerous times in a row, and that took a toll on his physique. He was not able to keep his subsequent spatial barriers fresh enough to perform as optimally as before. At least it lasted long enough to spare the Dark Apostle of any further damage. His azure energy still remained intact, though it would not take much to pop it entirely. Seeing how much damage the Dark Apostle sustained from a blast lance that did not explode in the face at point-blank range made many observers eager to study the victim's condition. As the fireball finally faded away, many people reacted in surprise that he was still in one piece. His strange scaled armor only bore minor scorch marks but looked otherwise intact. His gauntlets also looked scorched and dented but otherwise proved remarkably resistant against the first explosion. The oscillating fist managed to withstand the combined power of the the Dark Apostle and Furia. That was impressive. Damn! VS quietly cursed as he beheld the results. Our enemy's raiment is anything but ordinary. Even if the first blast lance has wasted a lot of energy into stripping him of his energy defenses, there should have been enough power left to breach or fracture his physical defenses. Instead, they have absorbed the remainder of the blast as if they endured a gentle storm. Do you think we will have trouble penetrating his raiment with our second blast lance? Not necessarily. I think our second spiritual guest may be able to offer a solution against this problem. Anyway, thank you for your service, Furia. The spiritual lady looked upset at the results. I wish I could have done more. I sensed that as the flames threatened to engulf the traitor's armor, those strange shells blocked and neutralized much of our energies. I am afraid that this material is highly resistant towards my power and that of others. Ah, that matches my suspicions. Furia let go of her hold onto Blinky, causing her to disappear. The companion spirit returned to his original purple shape. Meanwhile, the Dark Apostle had retrieved the second and last blast lance from his back. We need to go all out this time. VS agreed. We should be ready to expend all of the Warclaw energy that we have left. Even then, there is no guarantee that we can breach his raiment. The more I look at it, the more I suspect it has a very special origin. However, I think our next source of assistance may be able to crack this defense. Though a part of him felt reluctant to draw upon the second source, there was no one else he could think of that could offer him greater help under the circumstances. He silently sent out a request to an ancestral spirit and soon received a response. Blinky's manifestation transformed yet again. He slowly contorted back into a tall humanoid form that looked just as feminine as the last guest. The difference this time was that the new form exuded a much stronger sense of motherhood. The superior mother had descended onto Blinky. That was not enough. Cynthia Larkinson chose to descend upon her incarnation so that she could directly monitor what VS was up to this time. My sons, thank you for reading my work. If you wish to support the Mech Touch, please vote with your golden tickets. Purchase privilege for the Mech Touch. Read a varying amount of chapters ahead of regular readers, while enjoying a 99% discount on unlocking new chapters. Join the Mech Touch's unofficial Discord server. https://discord.gg/apb5kcu. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.